You think you know Hogwarts, but you've only walked the version that speaks above ground. There's another castle, coiled beneath the stone, folded between timelines, spelled into silence. A castle built not by founders, but by their failures. This isn't fan fiction. It's canon compatible. Every word, every name, spell, and shadow lives between the lines of what J.K. Rowling left unsaid. The owls, the ghosts, the secret societies, the vanished corridors. They're all part of a deeper Hogwarts. And the castle has been waiting for someone to remember. The first story explores the unseen flight of Hogwarts owls, the buried runes in the castle's architecture, and the ancient transportation systems tied to forgotten magical pathways. It uncovers the eerie truth that Hogwarts was never just a school, it was a living system of magical memory, and something is wrong with it. The second dives into the ruins of the Keepers, the secret magical order that once protected the castle's unspoken history. Our protagonist, Thistlewind Moraine, survives 5 impossible trials. But what she finds at the heart of the map chamber isn't power, it's a wand that refuses to sing and a castle that can't forget. And at the center of it all? A spell so dangerous, it was hidden in silence. A name so powerful, it was erased from every book. And a question so simple. It threatens to unmake everything Hogwarts ever claimed to be. What does the castle become when no one is watching? So if you're into real lore, deeper than trivia, richer than rehashes, and you're ready for a cinematic story told in novel form, this is it. Canon consistent, spine-chilling, and 100% written to feel like Rowling left a hidden door open just for us. Drop a like, subscribe, follow the spiral. Now let's start. The first sound one hears upon stepping through the ivy-covered arches of the Owlery is not hooting. It is the wind, spiraling up the narrow stone tower, weaving through centuries of worn perches and shadow-stained rafters, whistling secrets known only to feathers and ghosts. That morning, it carried the scent of ancient parchment and ghost-thinned winter air. The kind of chill that speaks of older magics. The kind that hangs on the breath of birds bred not just for flight, but for memory. Professor Thistlewind stood in the gloom of the West Tower, her half-moon spectacles glinting in the half-light as she offered a chunk of smoked trout to a bedraggled barn owl perched at her shoulder. The bird sniffed once, then turned its head sideways and clicked its beak in distaste. "You're spoiled," she muttered, more to herself than to the bird. 50 years ago, you'd have snatched that like it was dragon's liver. The owl blinked slowly, disapprovingly, and launched itself into the cold air, wings whispering with disdain. That was Murmur. They said he'd been hatched in the final year of Headmistress Dippet's tenure and had delivered messages through 3 wizarding wars, 2 that the public knew, and 1 buried deep in the annals of forbidden record. His feathers were piebald with time, his talons dulled not by disuse, but reverence. Students whispered that he could read your thoughts before your letter hit parchment. Professor Thistlewind didn't discourage the stories. Sometimes she even added to them. Owls, she once lectured to a bored third-year class, are more than messengers. They are magical intermediaries. Enchanted witnesses. When you write a letter to a loved one and hand it to an owl, you are offering a fragment of your soul to the wind. Most students had scoffed. One slithering girl had asked if that's why her owl shredded her breakup letters. Thistlewind had only smiled. The truth was more tangled than poetry. Long before Hogwarts raised its walls against the Highland fog, long before the 4 founders forged enchantments into stone, owls were already here, settled in the high trees that once blanketed the mountain ridges, guarding druidic circles and cairns where magic slept beneath moss and root. Wizards learned early to trust the birds who flew without sound, who stared without blinking, who returned from impossible journeys with talons unsinged and minds unread. The earliest magical theory on owl flight suggested they didn't truly fly from place to place, but from moment to moment. Owls, it was whispered, were not bound to our notion of time. Rather, they skimmed it like a stone over water, vanishing briefly and reappearing on the banks of other wens. The current ministry categorically denies this. But then, the ministry also denied the existence of sentient staircases until 1973. Deep in the archives beneath the restricted section, far below the winking torches and dust-covered books where the air turns cold and parchment rots into shadow, there exists a roll of enchanted vellum dated to the time of Egbert the Egregious. It details the binding of the first Owl Pact. It was not signed in ink. Thistlewind had seen it only once, summoned under special dispensation from the Hogwarts Board of Magical Creatures. She remembered the script shimmered faintly, like frost-catching firelight. The signature was nothing but 3 slashes of claw. It bore the unmistakable tinge of binding magic, wordless, bloodless, permanent. The pact bound the Owls of Britain to Hogwarts wards. Not through domination, but through mutual accord. They would deliver, they would listen, they would serve. As long as they were never caged, never enslaved, and always offered choice. And choice, in magic, is everything. It's why even now, no spell compels a Hogwarts owl. No professor commands them. Not even the headmaster. In truth, it is the owls who choose. And they remember. The West Tower was a testimony to that memory. Beneath layers of guano and talon-scratched stone lay etchings, spirals and sigils, worn by weather and time, that some believed predated the school itself. Owl script. Written with claw and beak. Not for human eyes. Students often assumed the owlery was placed there for elevation. But in truth, it was placed there for alignment. Each winter solstice, when the sun dipped into the farthest edge of the western sky, a shaft of amber light sliced through the owlerous uppermost vent, landing not on the floor, but on a specific roost, carved with obsidian and gold leaf, bearing the shape of a hollow feather. The loath perch, it was called by Thistlewind and few others. It was said that once a decade, an owl of singular purpose would rest upon it, and be given a mission no human hand had written. Such an owl had last been seen in the summer before the Triwizard Tournament. It had left Hogwarts with no letter and returned 3 days later, trailing frost and silence. No one knew where it had gone, or what it had seen. But 3 weeks later, the dark mark rose at the Quidditch World Cup. Coincidence? There were few of those at Hogwarts. Thistlewind believed the owls knew more than they shared. She believed in the stories told by the students who claimed their owl refused to deliver certain letters. She believed in the hollow space beneath the owlery where owls sometimes disappeared for hours, only to return with mud-streaked feathers and haunted eyes. And she believed that Murmur, who even now circled above the turrets in the dusk light, remembered all of it. Including what came before Hogwarts. Including the name of the one who taught owls to listen to humans in the first place. But that, she knew, was a story the birds would never give lightly. Just as she turned to descend the narrow stair, her foot caught on a loose stone. No, not loose, she realized. It shifted. Deliberately. A trap tile. One she'd never noticed in 40 years. The wall beside her sighed. A brick rotated inward, revealing a hole just large enough for an owl. Yet far too clean, too sharp-edged to be natural. As she leaned forward, something stirred inside. Not wind. Not breath. A hoot, low and resonant, vibrated out from the dark. She was not alone. And the owls were not yet done with her. The hoot echoed again, longer this time. A second joined it, higher in pitch, and then a third, deeper still, rising from somewhere beyond the hollow in the wall. They called to one another in a cadence Thistlewind had only heard once before. The morning pattern. She reached for her wand, but paused. Instinct told her this was no threat. Instead, she pulled a length of rough-spun fabric from her satchel, a scrap of ancient owl-handled cloth she used when handling the more temperamental flyers. Holding it up, she murmured, "Lumos," and the wand lit with a soft golden glow. She leaned in. The tunnel didn't lead into a wall. It led down, far deeper than the owlery should allow. Farther than the stone thickness of the West Tower, and far, far older. She hesitated only a moment before whispering, "Revelar." The spell shimmered forward, outlining faint tracks in the dustless stone, owl talons, unmistakably, and recent. Murmur's size, perhaps. But not murmur. This tunnel had been used recently. What lay below wasn't in any architectural record. Not even in the enchanted stones of Hogwarts, a tome so exhaustive it noted individual groans in the floorboards of the Gryffindor common room. No, this was not Hogwarts as the professors knew it. This was Hogwarts as the owls knew it. The descent took her deep beneath the tower. The air shifted with every step, cold, then warm, then something else entirely, a feeling like falling through memories that weren't hers. The light from her wand sputtered once, then returned, dimmer now, golden only by habit. She emerged into a chamber unlike anything in the castle above. A dome of greyish-blue stone, arching overhead in interlaced spirals that resembled feathers laid side by side. The floor was bare. No torch sconces, no furniture, no signs of human intrusion. Just a single column rising from the center, and above it, a suspended perch of petrified wood, hung not by chains or enchantment, but by tension in the stone itself. The perch hung in stillness. No owl occupied it. But feathers littered the floor, blue, grey, brown, gold-flecked, so many they formed patterns. As she stepped closer, Thistlewind noticed the arrangement. Feathers laid in concentric rings. Sigils only visible from the air. Owl spellwork. The center was empty. This was not the owlery. This was the aviary tower that wasn't. The term had surfaced once, in a badly damaged letter she'd found in the archives, correspondence between a caretaker named Bravik Nor and headmaster Phineas Nigellus Black in 1889. It was a complaint. "I refuse to clean the old aviary tower again. The birds are wrong. They speak when no one's around. They left me a dead mouse with a rune carved into its skull." Phineas had replied curtly, "Then avoid the tower, Nor. It predates even my predecessor and will outlive us both." Thistlewind had assumed it referred to the owlery. But no, this place had never been a room students or caretakers visited. It had never been for them. This was for the owls. And something had disturbed it. The floor trembled slightly, and a shape emerged from the far wall, not an owl, but a statue. Carved into the stone itself, it was shaped like a cloaked figure with a hood of feathers instead of fabric, and beneath the hood, nothing. No face. Just open space. But behind it, carved in immaculate runes, strange ones, not standard Latin nor Elder Futhark, was a name. A name she'd seen only once, whispered in the final pages of a banned book in the Department of Mysteries. Oscillaria. The Owl Mage. A myth. A scholar believed to have trained owls not only to deliver messages but to listen, to understand, and possibly to speak. If this was her shrine, if this was her work, then the ancient magics at Hogwarts had not all been cast by humans. Thistlewind stepped forward, unable to resist, and placed her palm against the runes. For a moment, everything went dark. Then came the memory. Not hers. She saw skies of ancient grey, torn by winds that did not obey the seasons. She saw an owl with 6 wings soaring above a tower carved from a single stone the size of a mountain. She saw Oscillaria, cloaked in feathers, speaking to a parliament of owls larger than any she'd known, commanding not with voice, but with thought. And she saw one owl, singular in color, black as spilled ink with eyes like violet embers, carrying something. A letter. A name. Her name. Thistlewind staggered back, breaking the vision. Her pulse thundered. Her wand light flickered. Above her, from the perch, something descended, a feather, larger than any owl she'd seen could have dropped. Iridescent. Smoking faintly. Still warm. Murmur was nowhere to be seen. But his voice echoed faintly, inexplicably, in the air around her. The letters are returning. They know what you've touched. They're watching again. She caught the feather before it hit the ground. It pulsed once in her hand, then stilled. And above, far above, the owls began to call, not one or two, but dozens, maybe hundreds, their voices spiraling down the hidden shaft, answering the song of something ancient. And in that moment, she realized, the aviary tower had never been hidden. It had simply been forgotten. But the owls had not forgotten. And now that it had been found, they were ready to show her what else the wizards had lost. The owls were watching her now. Not the ordinary kind of watching, the glazed indifference of roosting birds or the hungry patience of hunters, but something precise. Coordinated. Every eye fixed, every feather stilled, every beak closed in a tension that echoed in her bones. Thistlewind ascended from the hidden aviary tower without memory of her own footsteps. The stairwell wound behind her like the coil of a great serpent, sealed with a final breath of air that left her lungs aching. She emerged back into the familiar decay of the West Tower with its drafts and echoes and centuries of droppings, and yet it felt counterfeit, like a portrait painted over something far older. The owlery was different now. She could feel it. Where once there had been chaos, hooting, flapping, the occasional rogue letter dropped onto some unfortunate fourth year. Now there was silence. Every owl was perched, watching her. Every one. From the snowy white school owls to the high-bred screech owls of proud pure bloodlines to Murmur himself, now circling just above the rafters with eerie calm, they regarded her not with curiosity, but recognition. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She sank onto an old bench beneath the east window, overlooking the moors where the early frost was already beginning to kiss the grass silver. She needed to think. Needed to untangle what she'd seen in the aviary. Oscillaria. The shrine. The violet-eyed owl. And the memory that hadn't been hers. But the owls weren't finished. With a soft flutter, one descended from the beams above, a slender boreal owl with one golden eye and one blind, milky white. It carried no letter. No food. Only a scrap of parchment tied with silver cord. The owl landed beside her and extended its leg without ceremony. She untied the parchment. No ink. No quill work. Just a single word, burned into the fibers of the paper. Famulus. Her breath caught. In ancient Latin magical theory, famulus didn't just mean servant. It meant familiar, an entity bonded to a witch or wizard soul, sharing magic, insight, and often lifespan. Familiars were rare. In modern magic, mostly confined to stories about cats and toads. Owls were never included. It was assumed they were independent, proud, untamable. Freelancers of the magical creature world. Messengers, not partners. But if that word, famulus, was tied to owls, if even a fraction of them were familiar bound, it would change everything. The way Hogwarts owls knew to avoid cursed letters. The way some refused to deliver to dark wizards. The way Murmur and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the wizards who chose. The boreal owl hopped closer and tilted its head. Thistlewind recognized it now, not a school owl, but a forest dweller. One of the Forbidden Sky clan that lived just beyond the outer grounds, who rarely ventured into towers unless summoned by something old. Its milky eye reflected no light. Its golden one reflected too much. She whispered, "Who do you belong to?" The owl opened its beak, and for a fraction of a heartbeat, it spoke. Not a hoot. A word. None. It was not a trick of the wind. The owl flapped upward in a burst of feathers and was gone. She sat motionless, trembling. No spell could force that. No charm. She began researching Hogwarts owls not as pets or post-bearers, but as possible familiars. She studied folklore, unarchived journals, even forbidden records from Durmstrang and Castellabruxo, where animistic bonds between students and magical creatures were more openly discussed. What she discovered was staggering. In a diary buried in the ruins of Ilvermorny's original library, a passage dated to 1753 described a thunderstorm where every owl in the school vanished at once, only to return the next dawn, each bearing a mark on their chest, a curved feather carved into the skin like a brand. None could be explained. None could be removed. In a page from a 14th-century Beauxbaton's herbal grimoire, a note scrawled in the margins warned, "Never charm an owl to do your bidding. If it returns your spell, it will curse your descendants." Even more shocking was the tale of an owl at Mahatokoro. One that followed a single child from birth to death and then, in mourning, burned itself alive in the school's sacred flame. Not out of grief. Out of ritual. A magical death bond. Familiars, it seemed, were very real. And owls, despite their public independence, were among the most ancient of them all. She returned to Murmur. Not with questions. With offerings. Scraps of incense-laced bark, tokens from ancient forests, small vials of crystal moonlight. All items tied to elemental magic that familiars were said to crave. Murmur accepted none of them. Instead, one day, he landed on her desk, dropped a single black feather onto her notes, and stared at her. No blink. No sound. And she understood. He already was her familiar. Had been, perhaps, for decades. But like all owls, he would never confirm it in the way humans wanted. With a declaration. With ceremony. With proof. Instead, he would continue to appear when needed. Deliver what was important. And carry, if it came to it, the weight of her final message when her own voice failed. Owls, Thistlewind realized, were not familiars in the way cats and frogs were. They were familiars in the way stars were. Always there. Distant. And burning. Watching long after your story had ended. Above her, the owls began to shift again. New arrangements. Different perches. They were preparing. For what, she could not guess. But the oath perch had begun to glow. And a storm was rising from the forbidden forest. And the next owl who arrived did not come from the sky. It came from the ground. And it carried a letter with no name. The owl that emerged from the ground carried more than a letter. Its wings scraped the stone as if shedding earth, not wind. Its feathers shimmered with soil and shadow, plumage darker than night, iridescent with a sheen of black and emerald. Its talons clicked over the stone floor of tea. He owlery like chisel taps on a tomb. And from the slit of its beak hung an envelope made of bark, not paper, sealed with wax the color of dried blood. Thistlewind did not reach for it. Not immediately. Because this owl did not fly like any she'd ever seen. And it didn't blink. It watched her the way deep magic watches, patiently, knowingly, with the timeless quiet of something that had seen the world turn more times than humans could count. The other owls parted for it. Shuffling backward, wings held respectfully downward. Even Murmur tilted his head and dropped his gaze. And that, more than anything, shook her. Murmur had never bowed to another owl. The air thickened. Not from threat, but from magic so ancient, so rooted, it made her molars ache. Finally, she stepped forward. The owl did not react. She took the letter. The envelope was cold. Not the chill of winter, but a deep, rooted cold. The cold of caves. The cold of things buried alive and still remembering how to breathe. She turned the envelope over. No recipient. No sender. Just a sigil, a carved rune not from any recognized magical language. But she'd seen it once before. Burned into the bark of a tree near the edge of the Forbidden Forest. A tree that never bloomed, never died, never moved, except in the memory of owls. The sigil of the Forbidden Sky. Long considered folklore, the Forbidden Sky was a term whispered among students and dismissed by faculty, some secret owl faction said to dwell within the deeper, magically inverted territories of the Forbidden Forest. Where gravity bent like soft metal. Where the trees grew roots toward the stars. Where time sometimes stopped altogether. Most dismissed it as myth. But Thistlewind had seen too many birds vanish into the forest, only to return days, or weeks later, unchanged, unaging, and utterly silent. They came back with feathers that glowed faintly under starlight. And letters no human remembered writing. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was not a letter, but a map. Made of feather fibers woven like vellum, it shimmered with topography, an aerial view of Hogwarts, but unlike any modern rendering. There were towers she didn't recognize. Paths that no longer existed. Moats, ruins, temples, even what looked like ancient runes laid into the very shape of the castle's shadow at noon. And deep in the forest, glowing faintly in bronze, a spiral. A spire of trees, encircling a crater of unnatural silence. At its center was the sigil again. The place, she realized, where the Forbidden Sky Owls lived. Or ruled. Or remembered. Beneath it, in minuscule runes only visible at an angle, she read a line that made her heart stutter. We do not serve. We remember. That night, Thistlewind left her quarters and walked into the Forbidden Forest. No wand. No owl. No plan. Just the map. And the feather murmur had left her. The Forbidden Forest at night was no place for the uninvited. The centaurs did not approach, but they watched. Acromantulas kept their distance, wary of something following in her wake. Even the trees seemed hesitant to shift their branches. She walked deeper than she had ever gone. Until the canopy began to change. It was not sudden, but it was unmistakable. The trees grew in spirals. The ground curved subtly upward. Gravity didn't pull but leaned. The sky, where visible, had no stars. Only the faint suggestion of light moving backward. And then the silence fell. She stepped into the heart of the spiral. And there they were. Not perched. Not roosting. Simply present. Hundreds of owls. On branches. On rocks. On air. Floating. Watching. She knew better than to speak. Instead, she knelt and placed the bark envelope onto a stone shaped like an eye. They watched her. One owl, larger than all the rest, descended without sound. Its wings did not flap. Its eyes were not round, but slit like a cat's. Its feathers were the shade of galaxies seen through mist. It landed, looked at her, and blinked, slowly. In that blink, her mind flooded, not with words, but with images. A girl in 1523 being led through the forest by owls to escape witch hunters. An owl giving birth to twins, one living, one fading into mist. A wizard in a crimson robe offering his wand to an owl, and the owl refusing it. And Hogwarts, being built, stone by stone, watched by the owls perched high in trees long gone now, yet never truly vanished. Then, a voice, not hers, not spoken, but known. You have seen the aviary. You have touched the oath. Now you must carry memory. And then, from the owl's beak, something emerged. A single silver thread. She reached up. The moment she touched it, everything shifted. She was no longer standing. No longer human, even. She was flying. Through storm clouds. Through war. Through peace. Through moments in Hogwarts history unseen by any human eye. Delivering messages. Watching students laugh, weep, die, rise. Guided only by instinct and oath. By the time she awoke, still kneeling, still human, the dawn had broken over the Forbidden Forest. The owls were gone. Except one. Murmur. Waiting for her at the edge of the spiral, blinking once. He turned, flew toward Hogwarts. And she followed. The forbidden sky was no myth. It was a memory. Alive. Winged. Eternal. And it had chosen her. Now it would reveal what came next. It began with a rattle behind the wall. A small, dry scritching that would have been lost to the casual ear, mistaken for a rat, or perhaps the skeletal flutter of a restless ghost. But Thistlewind, now attuned to the rhythm of owl magic, paused mid-sentence in her lecture and looked up, face pale, heart abruptly still. It had returned. That sound. Again. Not just a wall rustle, but the scratch of parchment on stone. The sound of a letter that did not want to stay hidden. She dismissed class early, much to the delight of her drowsy fourth years, and made her way back to the owlery. Not the hidden spiral tower, not the oath perch or the forbidden spiral. Just the mundane west tower. The facade of ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary now. Not since she returned from the forbidden sky with her skin humming faintly beneath her robes and her memory flooded with half-lives, half-letters, and the smell of owl breath in dark tunnels. The scratching was louder now. Murmur met her at the entrance and didn't blink. He just turned and flew upward. To the very topmost beam, higher than any student dared climb, where an arch of stone had cracked slightly during the last magical storm. She followed. What she found wasn't a bird. Or a nest. Or a fallen perch. It was a letter. Perfectly preserved. Floating in midair. Not magically suspended. Not enchanted. Held aloft by its refusal to fall. Thistlewind reached for it, fingers trembling. The letter vibrated at her touch, refusing, resisting. Until she whispered, barely audible, Accipio. Acceptance. The letter shivered once, and allowed itself to be held. It was old. Ancient, even. But the name on the front had not faded. To Ada Honeycress, 4th year, Hufflepuff Dormitory, 1891. The wax seal was still intact. She opened it carefully. Inside, the parchment was stained with age but perfectly legible, the handwriting neat and desperate. Ada, I'm sorry. I can't be in the Great Hall anymore. Not with the stairs. Not after what happened in herbology. They think I meant it. I didn't. You know I didn't. I've gone down into the hollow. The one below the Mandrake Pit. Where the roots are louder than words. If I don't come back, tell them it wasn't my fault. And tell Professor Elkin I didn't mean to hex the roses. I was only trying to make them bloom for you. Grayson, no surname. No trace of an incident like this in Hogwarts records. No mention of an Ada Honeycress in the house archives. And yet, this letter existed. Undelivered. unremembered, but preserved, held by owl memory alone. Thistlewind scanned the shelves of the owlery. There had always been rumors of ghost post, letters that never made it, owls who died in flight, students who vanished before receiving their final words. A superstition, she once thought. Until she found the others. Behind the stone, in a crack barely wide enough for her wand, lay a tunnel. Short. Dusty. Crushed feathers lined the entrance. A nest. But not of twigs or straw. A nest of parchment. Dozens. No, hundreds. Folded, wrapped, sometimes stained in tears, soot, or unidentifiable liquids. Letters that had never been sent. Never been received. Never been forgotten. This was the morgue of Owl Post. And it was alive. Letters shifted when she touched them. One shivered under her palm like an anxious animal. Another released the scent of lilacs when opened. Many had no addressees. Others bore names that hadn't appeared in Hogwarts rosters for over 2 centuries. One bore a date from 1602. Another was addressed simply, to the one who will understand what I saw. Each was preserved not by spells or protection charms, but by owl magic. Refusal. Will. Memory. Thistlewind spent the next 2 nights in the owlery. Murmur stayed close, often perched just above her, unmoving. She began reading. One by one. A Ravenclaw writing home to say she knew how her mother had died. But that she couldn't ever speak of it aloud, or they'd silence her too. A Slytherin confessing his love for a Muggle boy in the village, sealed in fear, signed in longing. A Hufflepuff detailing a conspiracy about the house elf work schedules, and how one of them had been replaced by something else. A Gryffinder's farewell to a father who never wrote back. A professor's warning that a magical breach in the astronomy tower might soon allow something in that wasn't meant to enter. Each letter painted a picture of Hogwarts more vivid, more intimate, and far more fractured than any textbook could allow. Not because it was darker, but because it was real. Human. Unedited. And remembered by owls. Then came the final letter. Sealed in blue wax. The sigil was the oath perch. Inside, if you're reading this, you've touched the memory. You've flown the spiral. You've heard them speak. Now, you must deliver what was undelivered. Find Ada. Find Grayson. Tell their stories. Let the owls speak through you. This is not post. This is prophecy. Thistlewind looked up. And every owl in the tower turned to her at once. Then Murmur flew directly to her shoulder. And dropped the final item. A key. Not ordinary. Feather-shaped. Iron-forged. And warm. And with it, a scrap of whisper thought, not from her mind, but from the memory of a bird older than any spell. The next room opens what no spell can find. And as dawn broke over Hogwarts, she understood, she was no longer just a professor. She was now the Owl Post. Not of letters, but of memory. The key was not labeled, but it pulsed. Gently. Warmly. Like a heartbeat in her palm. Thistlewind held it in the quiet hush before morning classes, standing just outside the West Tower, her cloak caught in the Highland wind, her thoughts spiraling like owl feathers in a storm. The sky above was pale lavender, bleached of stars. Not a single bird flew. Murmur was gone. He had vanished during the night. Not flown. Not left a trace. Simply ceased to be present. And yet, she could still feel him. Like a thought resting in the back of her mind. Like a memory you hadn't yet lived. The key vibrated once more. She followed its pull. It did not lead to any known room. Not the staff corridors. Not the owlery annex. Not even the staircases, ever fond of mischief and secrecy. It led her, slowly, insistently, down past the kitchens, through the candleless corridors behind the Hufflepuff barrels, past forgotten portraits and sleepy ghosts who blinked at her presence and said nothing. At the very end of a dead-end corridor, where even Filch's dust had grown bored, she found it. A door. Not enchanted. Not cursed. Just unnoticed. Ironwood. Plain. No handle. Only a feather-shaped keyhole. She inserted the key. It clicked once. Not a sound of mechanism, but of understanding. The door did not open. It breathed. And then it allowed her through. The room was impossibly vast. Not in physical space, but in presence. The walls were covered in feathers, none identical. None repeated. Each preserved in glass, suspended in soft light. A museum of wings. A memory of every owl that had ever served Hogwarts. Or more. In the center, a shallow pool of silver water ringed with empty perches. No owls. Only reflections. And not hers. Thistlewind stepped closer. In the water, she saw dozens of scenes playing simultaneously, overlapping images, impossible to separate, and yet intuitively clear. A child in 1923, sobbing beside an owl's broken body, whispering apologies in French. A mother owl wrapping her wings around an orphan student in the snow. A boy who had fallen from his broom mid-duel, caught mid-air by an owl that wasn't his, but had chosen him in that moment, for that purpose, only once, and never again. A headmaster who, after receiving news of a dying loved one, opened his window to cry, and found an owl perched silently beside him, sharing the space, offering no judgment. And then the pool showed her. As a young student. Alone in the greenhouse. Holding a letter she'd written a dozen times and burned each draft before this one. It was to her mother. Begging forgiveness. Begging to come home. Murmur had delivered it. And though no reply ever came, he'd sat with her afterward. All night. No hoots. No food. Just presence. Warmth. Silence. That moment had kept her from quitting Hogwarts. From walking into the forest with no wand. From vanishing. Until now, she hadn't remembered that part. Now she knew Murmur hadn't just chosen her. He had saved her. And that, perhaps, was what owl empathy truly was. Owl magic wasn't flashy. It didn't roar like a dragon or blaze like a Patronus. It hovered. Waited. Watched. Responded, not to incantation or command, but to emotion. Need. Intention. Some witches and wizards never bonded with their owl. Others swore their owls had carried messages they hadn't written, only felt. In 1812, a Hogwarts student fell unconscious during a potions accident. While in St. Mungo's coma ward, his owl flew not to his dormitory or family, but to the student's favorite tree in the courtyard. It perched there for 7 days without moving. When the student woke, his first words were, "Is Alric still in the ash tree?" No one had told him. The bond wasn't telepathy. It wasn't soul magic, like animagi or Horcruxes. It was empathy. The most misunderstood magic in all of wizarding theory. Because empathy couldn't be taught. Only offered. Thistlewind sank to her knees beside the silver pool. She wept, quietly, openly, for every undelivered message. For every owl who'd borne secrets and heartbreak and terror without reward or recognition. For every letter burned or lost or dismissed that still lived in memory. and as her tears touched the pool, a figure shimmered beside her. Not Murmur, but his memory. Featherlight, translucent, glowing softly at the edges. He blinked once and stepped onto the nearest perch. And just before fading, he left a feather behind. Not black, but silver, made not of keratin, but of light. It floated down into her hand, and as she held it, the silver pool cleared, revealing a path winding downward into the heart of Hogwarts, toward something older than even owl memory. The chamber where emotion and magic first met, and the room where a single question waited. What do you owe the ones who remember you, when you cannot remember yourself? The descent into the lower chamber began in silence. No torchlight guided her. No signs marked the way. Only the silver feather in Thistlewind's palm, now glowing softly, pulsing like a compass with memory instead of magnetism. As she stepped into the passage below the pool, the air changed. It thickened. The scent of parchment and stone gave way to dampness, old water and root sap, as if the very veins of Hogwarts were bleeding forgotten secrets into this path. And with every step, her ears began to pick up a distant, low-pitched tremor. Not music. Not voice. A hoot. Drawn out. Resonant. Haunting. And wrong. The room at the bottom was not large, nor grand. It was a circle, just wide enough to walk around its center thrice without retracing your steps. And in the center, a pedestal. On it, a book. But not a book of pages. It was bound in feathers, dozens, maybe hundreds. Black. Oily. Iridescent. No cover text. Only a sigil, a spiraled eye split by a vertical line. The emblem of the nocturnal owls. Thistlewind hesitated. She had read the whispers, what little the archives dared preserve. Owls that flew by night alone. Owls never bred, never trained, never bonded. Owls seen once during the First Wizarding War, appearing only to dark practitioners before duels or assassinations. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement had issued a quiet directive in 1982. Do not follow a black owl without a known return mark. Do not accept its letter. Do not open its mouth. Few understood the last line. Fewer lived long after ignoring it. She opened the feathered book. There were no words. Only impressions. Scorch marks. Dried salt. A page that bled a new language each time she blinked. A page that blinked back. One page burst into shadow smoke and reformed when she turned away. But deeper in the volume, she found what she had unknowingly sought, a map of Hogwarts, under moonlight only. Invisible to sunlight. Incomplete under stars. Revealed entirely only during an eclipse. On it, 12 routes, hairways. Through the castle and surrounding grounds that no professor, not even Dumbledore, had ever documented. Marked in ink darker than ink. The nocturne corridors. Used exclusively by owls that served not Hogwarts, but something else. She followed one such path the next evening. Not through doors, but through hollows, stone recesses that vibrated with old spells. She carried no wand. Only the silver feather, tucked behind her ear like a whisper. The corridor opened into an alcove behind the viaduct courtyard, a place sealed during the renovations of 1903 after an incident with a banshee. Inside, she found perches. Not stone or wood, but bone. Some bird. Some human. On each one, remnants of feathers so black they absorbed the lamplight completely. And from above, hanging like forgotten lanterns, empty cages. Thistlewind backed away, heart pounding. Then she heard it. Above. A flutter. Followed by the sound of air splitting without resistance. Then a hoot, unearthly, harmonic, deep as the ocean and high as wind screaming through cracks in the earth. The nocturne owl had arrived. It did not perch. It hovered. Its wings did not move. Its eyes did not shine. They devoured. Its presence warped the edges of the room. The walls bent inward, the air thickened to syrup, and her thoughts, began unraveling into threads of unspoken guilt. She saw every unsent letter she'd ever meant to write. To her mother. Her lost friend, Myra. To Murmur when he first vanished. They looped around her mind like new silk. And the owl watched. Not with malice, but with knowledge. This was not a creature of evil. It was a consequence. Born not to punish, but to remember what should never have been forgotten. Then, it dropped its package. Not a scroll. A stone. Cold. Flat. Smooth. Etched with a rune she could not translate. But she understood it. Because it was her name. Not written in letters, but in memory. The owl waited. No sound. Just presence. So she spoke. Softly. I remember now. The owl blinked O-N-C-E, both eyes at once, and then folded inward. Vanished. No flash. No smoke. Just gone. And the room was normal again. Dusty. Cold. Mundane. Except for the stone. Still in her hand. Still etched with her memory. Thistlewind sat for a long time afterward. What was a nocturne owl? A punishment? A witness? A harbinger? All of them, perhaps. But more than anything, they were reminders. That owls did not serve the light. Or the dark. They served memory. And some memories required darkness to survive. Back in her chambers, she placed the stone beside the silver feather. One pulsed with warmth. The other, with warning. Both hers now. And together, they whispered of one last message waiting. In a room no owl had entered in over a century. The astronomy archives. Where the stars had once aligned to deliver a letter never meant for the sky, but for the earth beneath it. And the child who had fallen through both. The war began, as most do, with whispers. Not in corridors, but in the air. The owls knew before the humans. They always did. Long before the Daily Prophet's headline screamed, "He who must not be named returns," long before the ministry accepted truth over politics, the owls were already flying different patterns. Thistlewind read it in the flight logs. She had been poring through them nightly since the nocturne owl disappeared. Half-mad scrolls of incanquill trajectories written in shorthand used only by Hogwarts' earliest postmasters. The record showed it clearly. Shifts in route. Changes in delivery timing. Suspicious non-returns. Patterns of behavior matching not weather, not exams, not Quidditch, but anxiety. Owls felt war. Not in prophecy. In vibration. During the First Wizarding War, a barn owl named Thatch delivered 192 letters in a single week, all of them unsigned, all of them warnings. No one ever caught him in the act. He left no scent. No magical trail. But every family that received one of his letters survived. Not untouched, but intact. The letters vanished afterward. The recipients never remembered writing back. But in a post-war interview filed quietly in the Department of Magical Communications, one survivor confessed, "I opened it, and I just knew. I didn't read words. I saw my daughter's face. I knew we had to go. We left that night. In 1997, as the Second Wizarding War overtook the castle and the sky itself filled with curses and fire, owls became more than messengers. They became mourners. When Fred Weasley fell, a tawny owl that no one had claimed shrieked once and dropped a single poppy onto his chest before vanishing in a whirl of wind. During the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, 3 owls circled the highest parapet, carrying no letters, no scrolls, just floating silently until the killing curse struck. Witnesses later claimed they disintegrated mid-flight. But their feathers never fell. And in the Forbidden Forest, as Voldemort gathered his Death Eaters around Harry Potter's limp body, 13 owls were seen perched in a perfect ring above the glade. Not hooting. Watching. Waiting. One Death Eater, now imprisoned, wrote in his pensive testimony, they weren't birds. They were judges. I don't know how I know. But I do. They weren't on his side. Or ours. They were watching to see which of us history would curse. Thistlewind had once thought war was measured in duels, headlines, losses. Now she knew better. War was measured in what the owls remembered. And they remembered everything. Even the letters that burned mid-flight. Even the names erased from record. Even the traitors who begged forgiveness not with words, but with fingers ink-stained and trembling, as they reached for a bird that never landed. There was one such letter in the morgue of Owl Post. It was sealed in midnight wax. Addressed to my son. No name. Inside, 5 words. Don't become the man I was. And below that, scrawled in panic, I sent her away. To protect her. Tell her. I had no choice. Please. The owl had never delivered it. The sender's name was never known. But Thistlewind recognized the wax. It matched the seal used on Death Eater summonses. And the feather attached to it? Not owl. But raven. Burned at the edges. In war, owls became more than familiars, more than witnesses. They became keepers of accountability. They did not fight. But they followed. Not to deliver. But to document. Some carried messages. Others carried final words. Some bore no burden at all, only the silence that followed when the last spell had been cast, and the screaming had stopped, and all that remained was the wind. And feathers. Back in her quarters, Thistlewind added the war feather to the stone and the silver. The trinity of memory. Murmur had not returned, but she felt him closer now. Every time she touched the feather, her heart steadied. Every time she held the stone, her breath grew cold. Every time she looked to the sky, she saw a pattern in the stars she hadn't noticed before, or a path. A line. A shape only seen from above. The shape of a letter. Unfolded. Empty. Waiting. And she knew. There was one final battle left in the archives. Not of wands. But of truth. And it lay not in the owlery. But beneath the Black Lake. Where the owls never flew. Because something older had flown there first. There had always been something unnatural about the West Tower. Not the owls. Not the stench. But the silence between sounds. Even on the busiest mornings, when hundreds of feathers beat the air into a fog and scrolls dropped like rain. Even then, beneath the chaos, there was a hum. Low. Constant. It wasn't enchantment. It was something older. Thistlewind had grown up believing the owlery functioned through simple charms, self-cleaning spells, scent neutralizers, preservation enchantments. Neat, tidy logic filed into staff records with perfunctory ministry oversight. But now, with 3 sacred tokens pulsing on her desk and the archives of war fresh in her bones, she knew better. The owlery wasn't charmed. It was alive. She began by tracing the tower's foundation through architectural records, only to find the base didn't match the floors above it. The stones were older, mismatched, carved with runes inconsistent with the rest of Hogwarts' foundational script. One rune repeated, however, an angular glyph shaped like a split feather intersecting with a spiral. She'd seen it before, in the Chamber of the Forbidden Sky, and in the oldest of the Nocturne corridors. These runes weren't written for humans. They were written for owls. Or, rather, for the mechanisms they activated. Behind the lowest row of perches, behind the tapestry that every first year learned to avoid because it smelled wrong, there lay a hinge. Not a magical one. A mechanical one. Oiled. Maintained. By no hand living. Thistlewind pressed against the tapestry, inhaling the sharp scent of iron and rain. It clicked. The wall did not open. It breathed inward. And behind it, machinery. Ancient. Groaning. Clockwork not built by wand, but by wing. Rotating gears in the shape of talons. Cranks wound in leather strips hardened by centuries of flight oil. Pulleys marked with scratches, tally marks from claws, not tools. And central to it all, a turning chamber with a constellation map that rotated with the owl's movements. Not for decoration. For synchronization. She had found the Etherium core. The magical mundane engine that kept the owlery moving with the flow of the magical winds. It was thought Hogwarts shifted rooms because of its mood. Wrong. It shifted to align with this. The owls didn't just adapt to the school's movement. The school adapted to them. She stepped deeper, ducking beneath low-hanging pendulums that swayed not with time, but with magical vibration. The hum was louder here. Not unpleasant. Almost like singing. A choir of unseen owls, chanting in a dialect older than Latin, older than English, an ancient air code of feathers, breath, and silence. And then she saw it. The panel. A control wall, not with switches or knobs, but with perches. 6 of them. Each shaped differently. Each carved with a house sigil, though not as the students knew them. Gryffindor's lion had wings. Hufflepuff's badger had a crescent moon etched above its head. Ravenclaw's eagle faced downward, eyes closed. Slytherin's serpent was devouring its own tail. The 5th perch had no sigil, only a spiral of starlight etched in gold. And the 6th had been broken. Shattered, splintered, its perch crushed under ancient weight. And beside it, a name scratched in by talon. Murmur. She reached for the spiral perch, the 5th. As her fingers brushed it, the gears whirred. The room shifted. Not physically, but functionally. Every owl in the tower above adjusted. She could hear it, feathers rustling in unified direction, claws clicking against stone, wings twitching as if receiving signal. A map unfolded from the central mechanism. Etched in thin threads of gold, coiled around the structure of Hogwarts like veins, it revealed a system no one had ever documented, the wingways. Hidden owl-only corridors connecting every major point of magical significance in the castle. Including the Room of Requirement, the Chamber of Secrets, the Headmaster's study, and the vault beneath the Black Lake. The one even house elves refused to speak of. She stepped back, heart pounding. The 6th perch, Murmur's perch, began to glow faintly, its ruin trembling with remembered magic. And in her mind, she heard a whisper, "You found the heart. Now find the wings." The Black Lake rarely stirs without reason. Even on windless nights, it ripples, responding not to the sky, but to the castle above it. The shifting weight of Hogwarts magic pulls at it, bending the reflections, whispering memories into the water. The students never notice. But the owls do. They never fly over it. Not even during storms. Not even in death. Because something beneath the lake stares back. And it remembers. The scroll in Thistlewind's hand remained unwritten. Not for lack of thought, but because she knew its recipient was not in the sky. It was below. Waiting. And it had been waiting for over a century. She took no one this time. Only Murmur's silver feather, the war-charred one, and the obsidian memorystone from the nocturne owl. Each now tied together on a braided cord that pulsed lightly at her chest, like a charm bracelet of fate. She walked alone to the lake at dawn. There, hidden behind a wall of enchanted reeds, untouched by herbology spells and avoided even by centaurs, was a stone slab. Flat. Unmarked. But warmer than the lake wind should allow. She touched it. And the slab folded downward, not outward or inward, but like a petal, revealing a narrow tunnel carved into black glass. Owl-shaped grooves lined the sides. Not carved for passage. Carved in honor. This was a grave path. And the water above it, held back not by structure, but spell, parted without ripple. The descent into the lake bed was slow, each step echoing through her thoughts as if the water touched her mind rather than her body. No wetness. No chill. Just pressure. Memories pushing in. Voices, half screamed and half sung. An old headmaster begging an owl to warn the ministry. A student confessing betrayal. A child, somewhere in the past, sending a letter they knew would never arrive. Each fragment drifted like sediment. This was not a tunnel. It was a filter. A place where words dissolved. Where only truth could survive. At the end, the chamber opened, round, hollow, and lit by light that did not come from torch or spell, but the stone itself. On the floor, bones. Not many. Just 3. Arranged in a perfect triangle. At their center, a perch. And on that perch, an owl. Alive. But barely. It was old, not in years, but in essence. Its feathers no longer moved with breath. Its eyes did not blink. It had passed into the state owls sometimes reached when they had delivered everything they were meant to, and yet remained, waiting for one final flight. This was the last courier. And it had been waiting for her. She approached with reverence. Laid the scroll at its talons. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, it breathed. Once. A sound like a door closing on centuries. And the scroll caught flame. Not hot. Not burning. Just glowing with white-blue fire as letters began to ink themselves across its surface, language older than runes, more fluid than tongues. When the flame died, the scroll remained blank. But the owl nodded. Lifted its wings. And rose. Not through the tunnel. But through the ceiling. Straight through the lake. Water did not touch it. Light did not disturb it. It simply left. And when it vanished, the stone chamber shuddered. And the bones crumbled. The chamber sealed. And a voice, not hers, whispered into the void. The last flight has begun. Thistlewind stood alone. But not abandoned. Her memory was now tied to the mechanism. Her message delivered. But where it would arrive, and what it would awaken, was no longer up to her. It was up to the owls. And the owls did not serve orders. They served remembrance. Even of things not yet remembered. Even of futures unchosen. And far above, in the owlery, the perches shifted. Not from movement, but from anticipation. Something was returning. And the silver feather pulsed once more. Its light now a beacon, pointing to the past, to the next part of the story, to the messenger who had once failed, and who had never forgiven himself. It began in 1947 with a pie. Pumpkin, to be precise. Delivered late to the high table during the welcoming feast of that year. Nothing about it seemed unusual at first, except that the slice was cold, and the owl who brought it refused to leave. It stared, unblinking. Its talons dug grooves into the tray. Then, before any professor could react, it vomited the slice onto the table, spread its wings, and flew directly into the great hall's chandelier, shattering the first of a dozen enchanted glass crystals that had hung since the founding. It was not madness. It was a message. And it was only the beginning. That fall, the owls began to change. They stopped delivering certain parcels. Books. Scrolls. Cakes. They refused to leave the owlery after curfew. Some wouldn't fly at all. Others, when forced, dropped their letters in hallways or outside bathrooms or, most provocatively, into the lake. Messages between houses were often misdelivered. An essay intended for a Ravenclaw professor appeared, still sealed, in the Slytherin common room fireplace. When opened, it contained not homework, but a page that read, "He doesn't believe you." By winter, over 34 letters had gone missing. 8 owls had vanished. And one owl, named Fiddler by the students, was found circling the astronomy tower for 3 days without pause. No food. No rest. Just flying. When it finally landed, it dropped a letter at Thistlewind's predecessor's feet. A former professor named Renlow. Inside, one word. Resign. He did. That night. No explanation. No replacement found. The students celebrated with fire whiskey hidden in their sleeves. But the owls didn't stop. The rebellion reached its peak on the eve of Beltane. The great hall ceiling, enchanted to show stars and moonlight, cracked down the middle with a thunderous sound. Not from a spell. Not from weather. But from impact. 3 owls had thrown themselves into it simultaneously. No deaths. No injuries. But a fissure that ran from Gryffinder's banner to the edge of the staff dais, and across the wall beneath it, in soot, you do not listen. The ministry sent investigators. Magizoologists, unspeakables, wandrites. None could explain the behavior. Magical interference was ruled out. So was dark influence. No illness. No external charm work. Just choice. The owls had chosen not to serve. And for the first time in Hogwarts history, no post was delivered for 7 consecutive days. The students called it the Week of Wings. Letters piled up in unused classrooms. Love confessions rotted alongside invitations to Hogsmeade. Birth announcements sat unopened beside condolence notes and expulsion warnings. An entire term of human emotion, unread, unsent, unremembered. And in that silence, the students were forced to speak to one another. Without owls. Without distance. Without delay. Some fought. Some cried. Some fell in love. But all began to understand. Owls were not tools. They were bridges. And Hogwarts had been walking across them blindly for centuries. The rebellion ended not with a speech or punishment, but with a gift. A student, only recorded as gemmed in the owlery logs, left a basin of crystal water at the base of the owlery stairs. No charm. No note. Just a basin. Within 3 hours, owls began to descend. First 1. Then 20. Then all of them. They drank. They preened. And then, as if by shared mind, they began delivering every single letter at once. A storm of parchment. A blizzard of ink. Not in haste, but in harmony. Some students woke to find letters resting on their pillows. Others found them tucked inside books they hadn't opened in weeks. One professor found her divorce notice folded gently into her teacup, with a feather beside it that matched the owl she and her ex-husband had shared during courtship. The rebellion had ended. But it was not forgotten. The cracks in the ceiling were never repaired. The owl fiddler never flew again, but remained in the owlery, perched on a solitary beam, watching every headmaster since. And once a year, on Beltane Eve, no owl at Hogwarts flies. Not even the wild ones. It is the unspoken day of honor. A reminder that to serve is not obedience. It is empathy. And even the smallest wings can choose when not to carry. Thistlewind returned to the cracked wall that week. She placed the silver feather, the war feather, and the stone against it. And for the first time in months, she wrote a letter. Not to her mother. Not to Murmur. To Jem. Whoever they were. She folded it. No address. No stamp. Just this line, "Thank you. They taught us. You heard them first." And she left it in the owlery. The next morning, it was gone. And in its place, a single orange feather. Fresh. Unmatched. And warm. It happened only 4 times in Hogwarts history. That we know of. Each time, it began the same way: an owl arrived. No one summoned it. No one recognized it. Its feathers shimmered faintly in direct moonlight. Its eyes held stars that hadn't yet formed. And it carried no letter. Only its presence. And in that presence, the future began to move. The first was in 1234, during the reign of Headmaster Oswin the Silent. A lone owl appeared during a lunar eclipse and perched upon the sorting hat itself. The hat spoke, unprompted. The child of lost tongues will be born beneath flame. When frost eats the lion, she must not be alone. The owl vanished. The record remained. The prophecy was forgotten for 300 years, until the birth of Arabella Whitbranch, the mute Ravenclaw who later saved Gryffindor House from freezing to death when the lake ice cracked beneath the Quidditch pitch in 1527. She had been born during a forest fire in summer. The second came in 1601. The owl was pale gold, silent as fog. It landed during a wedding in the Great Hall, one of the few official unions ever performed at Hogwarts. The moment the bride turned to kiss her beloved, the owl shrieked. Then dropped a single black feather between them. The bride died 3 days later. Her groom vanished within the month. Years later, Grindelwood W. Ere the same family sigil she bore. The prophecy had not warned. It had marked. The third came during the rise of Voldemort. But no one remembers it. Only the owls do. And Thistlewind had seen it. In the mechanism's memory. In the feathers of Murmur's perch. An owl had perched above the room of requirement the night Harry Potter first dreamt of the Department of Mysteries. It had no name. No sound. But as it passed through the owlery, every owl bowed. Even Murmur. Even the nocturne descendants. And in the dawn that followed, Fred Weasley dreamt of stars falling. And chose to laugh louder that week. As if time had whispered, "This is your moment. Use it well." The fourth came now. Thistlewind awoke with its presence already in the room. Not perched. Not hovering. Floating. Its wings beat no air. Its feathers left no shadow. But she felt them on her skin, like memory brushing against dream. It looked at her. No blink. No emotion. And she understood. This one had not come to deliver. It had come to receive. She reached for parchment. None remained. So she reached inward. For memory. And she gave it all. Everything. The forbidden sky. The oath perch. The Morgavaul post. The rebellion, the war, the silver feather, the prophecy of wings. She poured it silently, willingly, into the air between them. And the owl opened its beak. Not to hoot, but to absorb. The truth. The story. The remembrance. It flew upward, through the ceiling, leaving no mark. And for the first time in her life, Thistlewind felt empty. Not broken, but delivered. Above Hogwarts, stars shifted. Not visibly. Not astronomically. But magically. A new constellation appeared, seen only by those who still remembered the taste of owl wind in their lungs. A winged spiral. And beneath it, the castle breathed. Feathers fluttered across the grounds. Letters arrived on pillows without senders. A first year found her lost sister's diary beneath her bed. A portrait began weeping again, finally released from silence. And one old owl, crippled, half-blind, and barely flighted, stood, for the first time in years, and took wing. Murmur. Returning not from death, but from completion. Thistlewind watched from the owlery, a tear on her cheek, the final scroll unrolled before her, unread. She didn't need to read it. She already knew. The owls had finished the letter. And Hogwarts would remember. Not because it was told to, but because they had carried it. Through sky and sorrow. Through silence and storm. And into forever. The letter was gone. The feather had faded. The stone had grown cold. Yet Thistlewind remained. Not as a professor. Not anymore. She had cleared her desk. Dismissed her classes. Filed her resignation with a headmistress who hadn't spoken a word, only stared, and nodded, and reached once for her own owl, who no longer flew. Outside, the seasons passed unnoticed. Inside, Thistlewind walked corridors no longer marked on maps. Her robes had dulled to charcoal grey, the color of ash after memory. Her eyes, once the sharp brown of an active mind, had gone pale with depth, like she was seeing through more than walls. Because she was. The owls no longer perched when she entered the owlery. They bowed. Even Murmur. Especially Murmur. Every letter since the final flight had gone undelivered. Not because they were blocked. Because the owls were waiting. For her. For what came next. And so she began again, not at the towers, but at the base. Beneath the owlery. Beneath the foundations. Beneath even the dirt where the first stone had been placed. There, hidden in a vault of root and echo, the feathers led her to a wall that bled memory. She did not knock. She placed the war feather into the stone groove. The wall sighed. Not open, but inward. As if it remembered her from another life. Behind it, a staircase of whispering steps. Each one muttered in a voice not her own, "You are not chosen. You are remembering. You are returning." She walked down. And the air grew denser. Not with magic, but with intention. The map chamber did not introduce itself. It didn't need to. The ceiling curved like an unfurled scroll. The floor glimmered with etched ley lines, paths not through land, but through consequence. No birds waited here. No feathers. Only dust. And silence. Until a ripple in the air formed a doorway. Not physical. Mental. A gate that opened inward. And a voice, not like the owls, not like murmur, not like prophecy, spoke. You delivered memory. Now you must walk it. You may enter. And so she did. Into a world not built by the founders, but protected by those who had watched long before names were written in books. Into a chamber that did not preserve the past, but tested it, interrogated it, preserved what mattered, erased what lied. And from deep within its walls, something pulsed. A heartbeat. Stone. Dust. Magic. And Thistlewind stepped forward as a student again. Not of spells, but of memory. The room had no doors. It did not need them. The walls of the map chamber curved inward like a stone womb, silent, suffocating, and still. A dull light emanated from the floor, not bright enough to cast shadows, yet enough to reveal every forgotten crack in the ancient, rune-etched walls. Thistlewind stood in the center, alone. No wand. No feather. No owl. Only the whisper of dust swirling around her boots like forgotten breath. She took a single step forward. The stone groaned beneath her. Not in protest, but in recognition. The floor shimmered, and lines carved into the ground illuminated. Thin as veins, they pulsed outward in spirals from her feet, forming a map beneath her. But not of land. Not of corridors. Of choices. Her choices. Every step she had taken at Hogwarts. Every refusal, every silence, every lie she had allowed to settle in the corners of her truth. The lines glowed a soft amber when she remembered clearly. They glowed white when she regretted. And when she reached the edge of the spiral, where she had last held murmur in her palm, they turned black. She knelt. Not from pain. From weight. The stone pressed into her knees. A voice echoed around her, ancient and sexless, the tone of stone rubbed smooth by memory. You walk the spiral. You have entered the trial of regret. We do not ask for power. We ask for truth. Begin. The first memory rose without warning. A sphere of mist hovered above the stone, projecting light and form in vapor. A girl appeared. 13 years old, eyes swollen from tears, clutching a wand broken at the hilt. Thistlewind knew her instantly. Myra Yarrow. Her best friend. Gone these 30 years. In the memory, Myra sobbed, shoulders shaking. She held out the broken wand toward someone just beyond the mist. The projection blurred there, indistinct. Then Myra spoke. I didn't mean to hurt them. But they wouldn't stop. I hexed them too hard. I need your help. The voice was brittle. Begging. And then the real truth appeared. The girl in the mist, the younger Thistlewind, stepped back. She didn't take the wand. She didn't speak. She just turned. And walked away. The sphere faded. Silence returned. But the stone beneath her feet hissed, burning a word into the floor at her feet. Abandoned, she fell backward, wind knocked from her lungs, the air pressed with shame. The voice returned, you did not forget. But you chose not to return. You will now carry that. Unless you speak. Thistlewind's voice cracked before it came out. I was afraid. The walls shifted. And now? I am still afraid. But I won't turn away again. The word faded from the stone. And a door formed in the wall, shimmering, not solid. She passed through it. The second chamber was smaller, circular, bare, and completely dark, until the ceiling split open. From it, light shone, not from above, but through the ceiling, like memory falling into place. It projected a different memory. Not hers, but Hogwarts. The first keeper, a tall figure in grey robes, faceless, stood alone in the same chamber. Their wand was carved with unfamiliar runes. Around them, 5 objects: a cup, a quill, a mirror, a ring, and a key. One glowed. The mirror. The keeper approached it, and their face became clear. It was Thistlewind, but older. Eyes white with dust. Voice broken by time. You cannot be a keeper unless you know what you would never want remembered. The real Thistlewind shivered. "What is this?" she asked aloud. The chamber answered, "This is your trial of intention. Do you seek knowledge for the world, or to prove you deserve to carry it?" The mirror glowed again, and in it she saw herself, not as she was, but as she once wanted to be: headmistress, acclaimed researcher, respected, alone. Then it shifted to a version of herself feeding Murmur as a young girl, whispering nonsense poems about moonlight and parchment. That version was not alone, but forgotten. She turned from the mirror. "I'm here because I remember," she said. The mirror shattered. Not loudly, just into dust. It fell upward, and the final door opened. The third chamber had no trial. Only a chair, and on it, a cloak. Feathered, stone-colored, threaded with faint silver. Not an object of reward. An invitation. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. And when she draped it across her shoulders, she felt every choice she had made settle into her skin like permanent ink. The room whispered, "You are not absolved. You are not finished. You are now a walker of the map. You may proceed." The final wall opened, and she saw it. The map, etched across a vaulted dome the size of the Great Hall, suspended above an abyss with no floor. A map not of Hogwarts, but of every keeper who had ever been. Their names, their trials, their failures. Some crossed out, some still glowing. One name pulsed gently in greenish silver. Her own. Thistlewind, Walker initiated. Behind her, the stone sealed. And far above, in the owlery, Murmur opened one eye. The map sang. Not loudly, just a hum, like wind brushing across old parchment, but enough to echo through Thistlewind's bones. The domed vault above her shifted slowly in response to her presence, names and lines glowing in pulses, as if waiting for permission to speak. She gave none. Not yet. Instead, she stood at the edge of the abyss, watching the names. They moved. Not from magic, but memory. This was not a map of Hogwarts. It was a map of intention. Every keeper, every trial, every line a choice. And one name kept reappearing, not in full, not fixed, but fragmentary, like a ghost slipping through runes. Sir, always cut short. Always followed by a glimmer in the northwest quadrant of the dome, where the forest met the school, where the ley lines tangled like roots refusing to grow straight. She turned away from it. For now. In the chamber beyond the dome, she found the next marker, a pedestal of polished ashwood surrounded by shattered wand cores, phoenix feather, unicorn hair, dragon heartstring, all burned to husks, or coiled in tangles like dead nerves. The plaque read, "Here lies the legacy of those who shaped fate. All 1 seek power, but 5 were made to seek destiny." She blinked. She had read of 3 great wandmakers in British magical history, Gregorovitch, Ollivander, and Fawley. But never 5. The inscription continued, 1 wand for each path, will, sacrifice, silence, sight, and return. Only 1 remains. The ashes shifted beneath her foot. A piece of wand, blackwood, curved, with a rune carved into the grip, rose from the ash and floated before her. She recognized the rune. It had appeared once in a book long since banned from the Hogwarts library. A volume called Wands Without Masters. The rune meant call. Not summon. Not control. Call. As in, what a soul does when it reaches for something it has never touched, but somehow remembers. She extended her hand. The wand did not float to it. Instead, it pointed back toward the spiral stair behind her. Not in retreat. In instruction. This wand was not meant for her. Not yet. It was meant for someone else. Someone whose name had been erased. And whose name was now calling back. She followed the direction. Back into the corridor. Through dust and silence. Until she reached a wall she didn't remember passing on her way in. It was carved with scenes, not of battles, but of wand-making. 5 figures. Not all human. One with elongated limbs and fingers like vines. One with no face, only a swirling sigil where their features should be. One whose mouth was stitched shut. Another with hair woven from parchment. And one, hooded, silent, watching. At their feet, 5 staves. Tall. Uneven. Living. They pulsed. The hooded one stepped forward in the carving, hand outstretched, not to offer a wand, but to take one back. Thistlewind whispered, "Who are you?" The stone did not answer. But the air changed. A door appeared. Beyond it, not more rooms, but forest. The forbidden forest. Not the one above. A version below. Gnarled, fogged, echoing with hoots and silence. And in the center of it, a tree. Massive. Carved with the same rune, call. The wand floated forward. Pressed itself against the bark. And a voice, not hers, not human, spoke in the language of the old forest. The 5th wandmaker never left. He waits beneath the bark. He listens through stone. He remembers the wand he never gave. The one meant for the child who never returned. And suddenly, she knew. The name. Incomplete. Fragmented. Ghostly. Sir, not Serafina. Not Serpentus. But Sir Ian. A student who had vanished in 1751. No record of death. No body. Only a final entry in a trial log, trial of sight failed. No retrieval authorized. They had left him. And the wand he was meant to wield had never been claimed. Until now. The bark of the tree cracked. Split vertically. And inside, embedded in amber, a wand, taller than any she'd ever seen. Knotted. Pale. Feather-marked. She reached out. And the forest shuddered. The memory awoke. And the wand screamed. It did not burn her. It recognized her. Not as master, but as messenger. She dropped to her knees. Vision filled with light and roots and echoes of names she hadn't yet spoken. And above her, from nowhere, a single owl hooted. Not murmur. Another. New. Its eyes were gold. Its feathers etched with bark. It dropped a letter, sealed in green wax. Addressed not to Thistlewind, but to the wand itself. She opened it. Inside, one sentence. "We were wrong to leave you." The owl vanished. The wand glowed. And in the chamber behind her, the map rewrote itself. Lines redrawn. Paths reopened. And a name, finally complete, burned across the dome in pale green fire: Sarian Vex. Keeper, awaiting return. And deep within the map's lowest point, a heartbeat sounded again. Faster now. Awakening. Because the wand had remembered. And so had the school. It was not Godric's hand that laid the first stone. Nor Salazar's wand that lit the first torch. Nor Rowena's wisdom that formed the floor plans. Nor Helga's kindness that called the first students. It was something, someone else. Several someones, in fact. And they never asked to be remembered. Because they were not meant to be followed. Only to guard. Only to keep. Thistlewind traced her fingers across the newly exposed layer of the map chamber dome. The glow from Sarian Vex's name had unlocked a new segment, low along the dome's base, hidden behind years of dust and magical sediment. It shimmered in hues she couldn't describe, colors not seen but felt. Pain. Hope. Isolation. Sacrifice. These weren't symbols of houses. These were truths of trials. Beneath the etchings, 5 names began to fade in. Erith Dew Night Mirror of the Fold Callous Umbral Solwind Thresk Sarian Vex the First Keepers. Not house-aligned. Not sorted. Just chosen. The chamber shifted again. A plinth rose from the floor. On it, a basin of deep black glass. Not a pensive. Older. Rawer. A vessel for something Hogwarts had long since stopped teaching: primordial memory. Not filtered. Not catalogued. Living. Wild. Reluctant. She touched the surface. And the room vanished. She was standing on a field. Grass, wild and golden, spread in every direction, with no castle in sight. Only a hill. And 5 figures atop it. Each cloaked. None speaking. In the sky above them, no sun. Just a mass of swirling clouds, shot with streaks of greenish-purple light, the unmistakable signature of unstable ambient magic. Then a sound split the field. A shatter in the air. And from it, a rift, like torn parchment, opened, glowing at the edges, howling with windless power. The figures did not flee. They stepped toward it. One held a mirror. One held a seed. One held a key. One held a single, coiled letter. And one, tall, thin, veiled, held nothing. But when the rift pulsed, it flinched. The veiled figure stepped forward and reached out a bare hand. The rift closed. Not by spell. Not by charm. By acceptance. The veiled one turned, removed their hood. And Thistlewind saw the face. Not young. Not old. Just unfinished. As though still being written by the magic it held. "We are the keepers," it said. "We do not command. We witness. We do not protect the school. We protect the reason it was built." The vision faded. Back in the chamber, Thistlewind gasped, falling to her knees. The black glass basin pulsed. And behind her, a wall opened, not with magic, but with memory recognition. A passage descended into the vault's 3rd level. She followed. The air shifted. Heavy. Breathless. The corridor's walls were not stone but metal, brushed iron carved with ancient runes. Not protective. Preventative. To hold something in. Paintings lined the walls. Not moving. Still. Not enchanted. Burned into wooden canvas by heat and thought. Portraits of figures she didn't know. Figures no one remembered. But in the bottom right corner of each, the keeper's spiral. Some wore cloaks. Some armor. One wore a dress made entirely of letters. Another was missing a face. Each carried a wand and something else, a key. A compass. A vial. A feather. A mask. All relics. All lost. And in the final painting, a blank frame. No figure. Only the etched words, "The last keeper has not yet come." Below it, a small inscription, "If the castle chooses, they will not be born. They will be remembered." Thistlewind stepped back. Heart pounding. The keepers had never vanished. They had disappeared by design. The sorting hat had never sorted them. Because it could not see what magic had already claimed. They were chosen outside of the system. They passed among students unnoticed. Sometimes professors. Sometimes portraits. Always watchers. Never leaders. She ran her hand over the inscription. And the frame glowed. Only for a moment. Enough to project an outline. Of a figure in grey. With a feathered clasp. And her own eyes. Far above, the map shifted again. New trails illuminated. Old ones rewrote themselves. And a trial marker, long dormant, flared red. Location, the Divination Tower. Riddle class, Moonfold Archive. Access level, unrecorded. And in the owlery, Murmur took flight again. Not in ceremony. But in urgency. Because the next keeper had been called. And the castle would remember. Whether the humans did or not. The air in the map jam. Wind stood at the edge of the great dome, hands clasped behind her back, watching as the lines beneath the surface reconfigured again, spirals flattening into arcs, arcs splitting into corridors, corridors bleeding into branching tendrils like veins or roots. No staircase, no spell, no house tapestry in the known castle mapped like this. This was no cartography of stone. It was a cartography of motive. The moment she understood it, the map shifted. Not to reflect her discovery. To test it. A glowing path appeared in front of her, spiraling out from her feet and winding toward the western wing of the dome. Where it passed, other lines dimmed, as though unwilling to share space with her memory. But one, to the far left, flared violently, flashing red. She turned to look. That path bore a name. Solwyn Thresk. The Keeper of Sacrifice. The keeper who had, according to whispered legend, vanished in 1033 during the Trial of Silence. His last word said to echo eternally beneath the kitchens. But it wasn't a memory of death the map showed. It was a corridor he had built. With intention. And it glowed because her intention had contradicted it. She stepped forward to test it. The floor beneath her rippled. Not physically. Emotionally. Memories she hadn't thought about in years rose to the surface, not tragic ones, but petty ones. Bitter thoughts. Silent judgments. Times she'd withheld kindness to protect her pride. Each step closer to Solwyn's corridor made them stronger. By the time she reached the threshold, she was drowning in self-justifications. I didn't have time to respond to Myra. He deserved to be corrected publicly. She wouldn't have listened anyway. She pressed her hand to the wall. The map resisted. Your step does not match your soul, the chamber whispered. Adjust, or leave. She pulled back. Not from shame. From wonder. This map did not record history. It responded to the emotional residue of memory. Every corridor shaped itself around the soul of the one who walked it. Which meant every keeper hadn't just left paths, they'd left tests. And the only way to walk those paths was to become like them. Not impersonate them, but face what they faced. Make the choices they made. And survive what they could not. At the northern edge of the dome, a new route appeared. Short. Pale. Barely lit. But open. At the end of it, a circle. A compass. Spinning. The trial of intention. But it wasn't hers. The map wanted her to walk Sarian Vex's path. His name was blinking. Each pulse a question. Will you walk what he could not? Will you remember what he died to forget? She followed it. Each step stripped away noise, her breath, her heartbeat, even her thoughts. The farther she walked, the more she felt carved, like stone giving way to form. At the compass, she stopped. It floated. Silent. Waiting. And then it pulsed. Once. Twice. And projected a memory into the air. A boy, tall, with silver-flecked hair and storm-grey eyes, sat at the edge of the forest. Alone. Cloaked in grey. A wand on the ground beside him, untouched. He looked up, not at the sky. At the castle. And whispered, I didn't want to leave her behind. Then the image shifted. A girl, his sister, maybe, locked in a corridor, pounding on an invisible wall, crying. Sarian, please. Don't go. It's not your burden. But he had already turned. He was walking the path. The trial of sight. And he was already forgetting her name. The price of vision, sacrifice of memory. He passed through the veil. And was erased. The compass dimmed. Thistlewind stood trembling. The one she carried vibrated. Not from instability. From grief. It had been waiting centuries for him. And now, it wept. The map behind her redrew again. And a corridor opened behind Solwyn Thresks. Unmarked. Unlabeled. But pure white. And waiting. She turned back to the center of the dome. Every name around her flickered. And she felt it in her chest, the keepers had not built this map to teach. They had built it to test the future. To ensure that whoever stood here next had already been changed. Not by spells. Not by books. But by regret. By truth. By walking paths they weren't meant to walk, and choosing to anyway. The map remembered. And now so did she. Above her, the dome's apex flared once, projecting a sigil into the air, a spiral surrounding a feather. Around it, for symbols. A closed eye. A cracked mirror. A weeping key. And a broken quill. Each hovered. Then vanished. Leaving behind a single word, next. And from the owlery came the sound of 5 hoots, layered, synchronized, like a chord in the wind. Murmur flew once in a wide arc. And the message was clear. The trials weren't over. And the map wasn't finished drawing. The entrance had no arch, no inscription, no door. Just a blank wall, smooth as marble, matte as ash. But when Thistlewind reached out, it opened. Not with sound. Not with spell. But with recognition. As if the stone had once known her, and had been waiting for her to remember. Beyond it, the corridor of trials. 5 passageways branched from a circular chamber, each marked by a sigil glowing just above the floor. A withered eye, regret a bladed leaf, guilt a gaping mouth with no sound, silence a twisted tower, ambition and a feather locked in a clock's face, fear each path pulsed with a rhythm. Not magical. Emotional. Alive with centuries of hesitation. These were not places one chose to enter. They were places that called to the unresolved. And the eye, the sigil of regret, glowed for her. She stepped toward it. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the world bent. Not around her. Through her. She was standing in the hallway outside her old classroom. 3rd floor. Dust-mottled glass. The scent of spelled chalk and ink. Except, it wasn't the present. She was watching herself. Young. Bright-eyed. Still unbent by the years. She was walking fast, arms full of papers, ignoring a first-year Slytherin who had clearly been crying. He said nothing. Just tugged at her sleeve. The younger Thistlewind shook him off. I'm late. She walked on. And the moment she turned the corner, the corridor began to collapse. Not physically. Emotionally. The walls melted into tears. The floors crumbled into paper-thin ash. The boy's face hovered in the smoke, whispering, "You could have helped me. You were the only one who saw." Thistlewind whispered back, "I didn't know it was that serious." The face didn't blink. "You knew. You just didn't want it to be true." She fell to her knees. Regret hollowed her from the inside out. This was no illusion. This was the castle remembering. A trial built not from fiction, but fact. Events only the stones and whispers had witnessed. And now, they were answering. A door appeared behind her, made of her own reflection. Etched with a question. Would you go back to change it, knowing that you wouldn't become who you are now? She hesitated. The boy's face flickered once more, fading. She stood and touched the handle. No. But I would have stayed a moment longer. Just long enough to know him. The door opened. Light. Silence. And beyond it, the next sigil. Guilt. The hallway narrowed. She was no longer seeing herself. Now, she was seeing others. 3 students she had failed to protect. Not by inaction. By action. A disciplinary note she had signed without reading. A detention she had issued without confirming the full story. A charm she had taught that caused an accident when misused. Each face rose. Not angry. Just tired. "We did not blame you," said one. "We trusted you," said another. "And you couldn't carry that," said the third. She tried to speak. Her throat closed. The trial of guilt did not let her defend herself. Only walk. And walk she did, past each memory, each weight. With each step, a bracelet appeared around her wrist, etched with their names. She now wore them. Not as punishment. As permanence. The exit door read, "You are not absolved." She whispered, "I know." The door opened. And so did the next trial. Silence. The world vanished. Not to blackness. To void. No sound. No heartbeat. No internal monologue. A space where self could not exist. She floated. For how long, she did not know. There was no time here. Only stillness. Until she felt it, a tug. Something reaching for her. Not with words. Not with touch. Just presence. She followed. The moment she reached it, the silence cracked. Not shattered. Cracked. Like light leaking into a cave. And then, a single note of music. Not composed. Not performed. Just a vibration of existence. And with it, Her voice returned. She whispered, "I remember." Silence answered, "Then go." The fourth trial rose, ambition. This was not a challenge. It was a mirror maze. Dozens of versions of herself. Famous. Feared. Adored. One wore ministerial robes. Another taught at Mahatokoro. One wore black, surrounded by followers whose faces bore no eyes. Each version whispered, "You could be more. You deserve more. Say the word, and we'll become real." She stopped before one mirror. She was happy in it. A child in her arms. No war. No trials. No keepers. Just peace. "Choose me," that thistle wind said. "Let us forget all of this. You've done enough." She wept, but said, "That isn't peace. That's permission to sleep while the castle burns." The mirror cracked. The maze fell. The final sigil rose. Fear. The room was cold. No illusions. No magic. Just a single note on a table. A letter. From her mother. Unopened. Decades old. Unread. She reached for it. Her hand shook. The fear wasn't in the letter. It was in the knowing. Of what had been left unsaid. Of what the L had carried. Of what she'd refused to hear. She opened it. Read 3 words, "I forgive you." The letter dissolved. She was standing at the center of the circular chamber again. All 5 paths sealed behind her. She wore the bracelets. She carried the cracked mirror. She smelled the parchment smoke. She heard silence curled in her breath. And she felt peace. Not comfort. Peace. The kind that hurts, but holds. The spiral map above glowed. And a new ring illuminated. The Keeper ring. She had walked the 5 trials. And the castle now held her mark. Above, in the dome, her name burned beside Sarayan's. Not as his replacement. As his reminder. And the stone beneath her feet whispered. She does not run from memory. She becomes it. Hey, if you're still listening, please drop a like. Lately, we haven't been doing so well in the YouTube algorithm, so if you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten Hogwarts lore, leave a like and subscribe. Seriously, it helps way more than you think. Alright, back to the vid. It sat in silence. Propped in its cradle of ironwood and stone, the wand known only as Vex's inheritance had waited in the chamber beneath the map for centuries. Uncarved, unyielding, untouched by any soul save one. And even he had not finished the claiming. Thistlewind approached slowly, her boots echoing faintly across the polished rune-etched floor. The wand pulsed faintly, not with life, but with tension. It did not welcome. It did not threaten. It simply waited. Just as it had waited for Sari and Vex. And just as it had refused every hand that came after. Records buried in the lower vaults told stories of those who had tried to bond with it. A duelist from Beauxbatons, celebrated for winning 5 tournaments without drawing blood. A prodigy from Durmstrang, who once bent for protective charms into a single syllable. A ministry archivist, who specialized in wand resonance and had passed every magical loyalty test ever written. Each had placed their hand upon the wand. Each had failed. The wand hadn't recoiled. It had simply grown cold. And in the presence of a wand that cold, no other spell would answer. As if it uncast the world around it. Thistlewind stopped within reach of the pedestal. She didn't extend her hand. She watched. The wand, pale silver black, shimmered under the soft magical light. It was long, longer than standard, its surface smooth but warped with something ancient. A groove ran down the center. Not carved. Split. Not by tool. By intention. Or grief. She whispered, "I'm not here to take you." No response. "I'm here to remember what you were for." Still nothing. She moved closer, reached into her robes and removed the 3 relics, the silver feather, the memory stone, the cracked compass from Sir Ryan's unfinished trial. She placed them around the base. "You were not made to serve," she said softly. "You were made to return." At that, the wand shivered. Just once. Dust trembled around it. The air shifted. A single rune burned into the pedestal, faint but clear. Unfinished. Then a voice echoed, not aloud, but in memory. A boy's voice. Young. Shaking. "If I take it, I won't come back." That's the rule, isn't it? Another voice answered, older. Steady. It's not a rule. It's a warning. But the wand won't sing until it's claimed. And if it sings for no one, then we remember. Until someone is born who hums the same song. She stepped back. Breath shallow. The wand hadn't been waiting for a new master. It had been waiting for recognition. She turned from the pedestal. Walked to the edge of the dome again. Raised her wand, and did not cast. She listened. And for the first time since she entered the map chamber, she heard it. A hum. Low. Resonant. A single note pulsing in the dome. It wasn't coming from the wand. It was coming from beneath it. From a memory locked in the stone. She dropped to her knees and pressed her palm against the pedestal's base. The chamber shifted. The walls cracked open with sudden motion, and a hidden drawer slid outward, creaking softly. Inside, a scroll. Wrapped in barkstring. Sealed in wax that shimmered green and silver. No address. No recipient. Only a sigil. Sir Ryan's name, coiled inside a spiral. She opened it. The parchment trembled. And wrote itself as she read, "To the one who returns what I could not carry, this wand was never mine to wield alone." It was tuned to memory. Not magic. The kind of memory that refuses to fade. The kind built by silence, and endings, and the long ache of a name never spoken again. If you are reading this, then you carry enough regret to understand. Do not claim the wand. Let it choose its moment. It will not sing for a person. It will sing for a memory finally fulfilled. When you speak her name, I will remember how to return. She finished the scroll. Her hands trembled. The chamber around her was still. But the wand had changed. It was no longer cold. It wept. From the groove down its length, a single drop of light slid, soft and gold and silent. As if the wand had mourned so long it no longer knew how to stop. She did not take it. She bowed. Not in servitude. In respect. And the wand pulsed once. Not for her. But for what she carried. Later, as she climbed back through the chamber, she turned to look one last time. The pedestal was empty. The wand was gone. But she knew where it had gone. Back to the walls. Back to the map. Waiting, again. Until a name was finally spoken aloud that had only lived in memory. High above, on a ledge beneath the owlery's highest rafter, Murmur sat beside a new owl. Smaller. Feathered in silver. Ice like rain on ancient glass. Neither spoke. But they both turned to the sky. Because something was moving beneath the castle. And soon, the map would need to choose again. The Forbidden Forest had never truly bordered Hogwarts, it had pressed against it. Smothered its edges. Watched its windows. It wasn't proximity. It was pressure. The kind that bends time and rumor and lets things older than castles sleep in plain sight. The centaurs knew this. They always had. But they had also chosen not to remember. Thistlewind stood just beyond the tree line, the stone spirals of the map chamber far beneath her feet now, replaced by roots and lichen and that silent watchfulness that only the forest could maintain. She hadn't come as a trespasser. Nor as an ally. She came as one who had walked 5 trials and survived. One who had heard a wand cry. That was why she had been allowed to cross the forest's threshold without resistance. Or so she thought. The air shifted before the first hoof step touched the earth. Not a breeze. A tension, like a bow drawn back but not yet loosed. They stepped from the mist with no announcement, hooves muffled by moss, eyes reflecting more than light, memory, perhaps, or the lack of it. 3 centaurs stood before her. The tallest was draped in worn stargazer silk, its hem trailing silver dust like comet trails across his chest. His name, she would later learn, was Braylan. The second, a young mare with eyes like burnished iron, carried a wand fragment woven into her manet. The third said nothing, and only blinked once before turning away. That, too, was a kind of warning. Braylan stepped forward. His voice was deep, distant, but never cold. You come from beneath. I do, Thistlewind said, not bothering to introduce herself. He already knew. You wear the spiral. I remember. He studied her face with something like regret. Then you have returned to the place we chose to forget. Thistlewind nodded once. I need to understand why. Braylan closed his eyes, as if searching for permission within himself. Because we failed. And centaurs do not like to remember when we were wrong. The forest thickened with that sentence. Not with branches or vines, but with weight. Thistlewind stood silently as he continued, not interrupting, letting memory unfold on its own. There was a time, Braylan said slowly, when we stood as the perimeter between the keepers and the corruption that sleeps beneath even them. Not all magic seeks power. But some magic seeks escape. He raised his hand and pointed deep into the trees, where no path had ever been marked on any marauder's map or castle chart. The first keepers, before your founders even arrived, carved paths through memory and consequence. They stored their worst truths in vaults beneath vaults. One such vault, what we once called the Chamber of the Weeping Branch, was sealed under our watch. Thistlewind had never heard of it. Not in any scroll, not in the map chamber, not even in the forgotten staircases that whispered her name in dreams. She leaned in. And what happened there, she asked. Braylan hesitated. Not from fear. But from shame. A keeper lost control, he said. Not of magic. Of grief. He tried to twist the map to rewrite a death. Not erase it, not resurrect it, but reroute its consequences. What came out of that intention was not magic. It was rupture. And he stopped. Looked away. The younger centaur, the mare with the wand fragment, finished the thought for him. We let it leave. Silence dropped like snowfall. Thistlewind stepped forward. What did it become? Neither of them answered. But the wind answered for them. It rose suddenly through the branches, rustling leaves without motion, lifting strands of her hair and whispering a single word from no mouth, unbound. Thistlewind felt it pass through her, the same way the silence had during the trial of stillness. But this wasn't absence. It was removal. Something once contained had been forgotten, and it still walked. Braylan stepped closer. You must not follow it. But Thistlewind had already made her choice. The wand had cried. The map had redrawn. The keepers had been erased, not lost. If you've forgotten something, Geras, she said, then someone must choose to remember it. The centaur exhaled, not in anger, but mourning. You are brave, he said. No, she replied. I'm necessary. They did not stop her when she stepped past them. The forest parted, just slightly. Not in approval. Not in blessing. In recognition. And beneath her feet, the moss pulsed faintly, spiral runes forming and fading, ancient language without grammar. The same word repeating again and again in the roots, return. 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 The centaurs did not follow. Because some memories could not be unforgotten once faced. And Thistlewind was already too far into the spiral to turn back. The divination tower had always felt a little out of place at Hogwarts. Perched like an afterthought atop the castle's northeastern ridge, it seemed to belong to some other structure, half-spiraled, slightly tilted, perpetually surrounded by mist whether it rained or not. It held the smell of burnt sage and dried starlight, and its staircases sometimes led nowhere if walked without purpose. No other wing of the castle treated time quite so loosely. It was the perfect hiding place for a secret society. And now, after centuries of silence, the castle had whispered it back into Thistlewind's path, Moonfold. The word had appeared on a corridor pane during her descent from the forest, etched in frost on the inside of a window facing the forbidden forest. As she watched, it melted into droplets and vanished, as though embarrassed to have been seen. Moonfold. A name not even the map chamber had spoken. That meant something. It meant someone else had remembered before her. By the time she reached the divination tower, it was nearly midnight. She didn't knock. Didn't announce. She simply waited. The tower didn't open. It leaned. A hallway tilted into view where no doorway had existed a moment before. Its walls were soaked in soft blue, as if moonlight had been caught in glass and turned liquid. She entered. Inside, the smell of old candle wax and silver ink clung to the stone like memories that refused to dry. The walls bore no portraits. No tapestries. Only soft grooves, etched by hand, where fingers had traced patterns again and again in search of something deeper than prediction. At the tower's apex, the observatory chamber waited. Not with stars. With scripts. Dozens, no, hundreds. Of inked spirals covered the domed ceiling above her. Not painted. Grown. Some shimmered. Others flaked. All glowed faintly, like echoes of unfinished spells. At the center of the floor, a silver quill hovering over an ink pot of what looked like melted moonstone. Unmoving. Asleep. Until Thistlewind whispered, I remember. The quill twitched. And then wrote. One of us returns. Then one truth may be rewritten. Speak the question the Moonfold died for. Thistlewind stepped forward. Her voice shook, not from fear, but from recognition. She knew the story. Or pieces of it. In 1863, a group of unsanctioned students had begun cataloguing the castle's magical anomalies, rooms that shifted locations, staircases that punished broken promises, windows that only opened during nightmares. They called themselves the Moonfold, for they claimed the castle's true architecture only revealed itself by moonlight. 12 of them met weekly, mapping not space, but shifts. One day, they disappeared. All 12. No one's left behind. No bodies. Only a note written across the ceiling of the divination tower. What does the castle become when no one is watching? That was the question. And so she asked it aloud. The ceiling responded. Not with sound. With movement. The spirals began to spin. Not all, only 12. They rotated slowly, projecting beams of moonlight down onto the floor, forming a circle around her. And then a 13th spiral appeared in the dead center of the dome. One that had never been drawn. It carved itself in real time, silver threads stitching themselves from air and thought, drawing a new sigil, a feather pierced by a ring of stars. The same sigil that appeared on the pedestal of the fifth wand. Sarian Vex Mark. Thistlewind stood in the center of the circle. The floor shifted. Not downward. Inward. A spiral stair opened beneath her feet, but not into stone. Into sky. She stepped forward and fell upward. The world righted itself. She was in a new room, one she hadn't walked into, but had been pulled into. This chamber didn't feel like the castle at all. It felt like outside. The air was sharp with lunar cold. The walls dripped with dew that never fell. And at the center of the room, a desk made of owl feathers and black iron. On it, a single map. No roads. No buildings. No walls. Only emotions. 12 circles, each labeled with a feeling. Desire. Doubt. Trust. Betrayal. Grief. Guilt. Memory. Intuition. Joy. Shame. Solitude. And wonder. Lines curved between them like a nervous system. And in the corner, a 13th space. Empty. No name. Waiting. A note beside the map bore one line in ink that gleamed when she breathed near it. The castle becomes what you feel when no one sees you. She reached toward the 13th space. Her hand hovered. And in that moment, she realized what the moonfold had found. The castle wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by unexpressed emotion. The stones rearranged when students repressed, when professors doubted, when grief was left too long to rot. It was not built from mortar and charm. It was built from human contradiction. She touched the empty circle. It lit with a word. One that hadn't been on the map. Regret. The 13th truth. Unspoken. Unprocessed. Unyielding. She blinked. And the quill from the observatory appeared before her. It dipped itself into ink and wrote a message in the air. You now carry the final emotion. Finish the map. But beware when the 13th truth is acknowledged. The unbound may hear it. The room faded. She stood once again in the divination tower. Alone. But with the quill hovering beside her, like a reluctant companion. A part of the map now belonged to her. And beneath the castle, a new corridor had opened. Not visible. Just felt. And it led not into memory, but into something that had escaped it. The ink led the way. Not with lines or symbols, but with weight. The silver quill hovered near Thistlewind's shoulder as she moved deeper into the castle's bones, its tip tilting slightly each time the path diverged. There was no corridor at first, just flickers of where stone wanted to open, where history had creased but never cut. The castle didn't guide her like a hallway. It nudged her like a memory. Beneath the charms classrooms, through a bricked-off pantry lost to house elves' maps, and beyond an alcove that once held a statue of a laughing child now turned to stone, she found the entrance. A wall of soot. Perfectly smooth, black as night, soft to the touch. She pressed her palm against it. It collapsed inward, not shattering, not opening. It simply turned to dust. A spiral stair wound down into a chamber that no student had named. At its center stood a desk covered in ash. Behind it, a figure hunched over a mound of parchment so weathered it no longer curled. It sank, like it wanted to return to the earth. The figure did not look up. Its fingers moved in endless loops, writing letters that faded as soon as they were formed. The moment Thistlewind stepped forward, it spoke. Its voice was dry as old vellum, flat as page edges. "What have you brought me that I have not already forgotten?" She stood straighter. "The 13th truth." The quill in her hand twitched. For the first time, the scribe looked up. His eyes were pale gray, inkless, as though drained. But they widened, just slightly. He leaned forward. His breath stirred the dust. "You spoke regret aloud." She nodded. He closed the book before him with both hands. It puffed a cloud of ash that smelled of forgotten names. "Then you've doomed us both." Thistlewind said nothing at first. She was too aware of the way the air had changed. There were no torches in this chamber. No chandeliers. The only light came from tiny flickers of rune embers etched across the floor, forming what looked like broken staves and half-spoken spells. "You're the scribe of dust," she said. He shrugged. "I write what the castle fears to speak." "And what happens to the words once they're written?" "They vanish," he said. "But their intention doesn't. That stays. That's why they have to be recorded in dust." She circled the desk slowly, noting the shapes hidden in the piles: torn robes, finger bones, wand fragments melted into curls. These belong to the forgotten. They belong to those who were removed. She paused. Removed. He turned a page and let it disintegrate. Some spells do not erase memory. They excise it. Cut it from time. Cut it from people. Cut it from the castle itself. And yet, he trailed a hand through the air. The stone remembers in dust. And I write what the dust whispers. Thistlewind placed the silver quill on the table. The moment it touched the surface, the ink in his inkwell flared silver. He hissed and drew back. "You brought moonlight into my sanctum." She didn't apologize. Instead, she opened the scroll from Sarian Vex, the one she'd kept hidden since the wand refused her hand. She placed it next to the quill. "You need to write this one in something more permanent," she said. He stared at her. Long. And then smiled. Not warmly, but like someone who had waited a very long time to be asked something dangerous. He opened a drawer beneath the desk and pulled out a second quill. It was made from a thestral feather, dark, sleek, invisible to anyone who had not seen death. It gleamed only when angled into sorrow. He dipped it into the silver ink. And he began to write. As he did, the runes on the floor shifted. Rearranged. Spoke. Thistlewind watched as the walls began to glow with names, dozens, then hundreds. Students expelled but never logged. Professors who disappeared mid-term. Owls that flew into the night and never returned. Books borrowed and lost, but whose voices still echoed. The scribe finished the sentence. Then looked up. "You've triggered the recollection." The name meant nothing to her. But the chamber shuddered as if the dust had inhaled. And behind the far wall, a pulse began. Faint. Organic. Measured. Like a heartbeat made of ash. "What is that?" she asked. He stood slowly. Something the keepers were meant to guard. But they failed. Thistlewind narrowed her eyes. "You mean the unbound?" His expression went still. Flat. "The unbound is not a person," he said. "It is what becomes a forgotten intent. When magic's consequence is buried, it grows its own will. Then why let it live? Because trying to erase it would be worse." The heartbeat grew louder. Dust began to drift from the ceiling. The scroll in front of her turned warm. The ink glowed. And new words wrote themselves beneath Sir Ryan's message: if you've reached the scribe, then the recollection has begun. Follow the corridor of ash. Do not speak. Do not blink. Do not remember what you see. The castle is preparing to correct itself. Thistlewind looked to the scribe. He did not meet her gaze. He whispered, "You've done what none of the keepers dared. You've made the castle remember its grief." And with that, the far wall turned to dust. Behind it, the corridor of ash. Waiting. Breathing. And within it, something moving. Something that had once been called a keeper. Now, only unbound. She did not breathe. Not because she was afraid. Because she had been told not to. The scribe's warning still rang behind her eyes: do not speak. Do not blink. Do not remember what you see. That last part, do not remember, seemed impossible. Because the corridor made sure you remembered. Even if the memory wasn't yours. Thistlewind stepped through the dust-thin doorway and into a corridor not built of stone or timber, but of accumulated loss. The walls were shifting ash, compressed into something like stone but still faintly breathing. Every few steps, she saw impressions in the walls: a wand tip, scorched and snapped. A torn Prefect badge, rusted beyond recognition. A ribbon, blood-stained and gently moving as if caught in some non-existent breeze. This was no hallway. This was an ossuary of intent. Where every forgotten action had left a mark. Where every spell unspoken still reached outward, like a scream that never finished. She moved carefully, slowly. The corridor narrowed the farther she walked. No torches. No magical light. Only a faint glow coming from the ash beneath her boots, each footprint illuminating names in fading script. Not hers. Others. L. Greaves, 1912 D. Kavik, 1754 Y. Emra, 1891 S. Vex, 1751. His name stopped her mid-step. Sir Ryan's footprint was still glowing. Fresh. Alive. Which meant he had walked this same path, and maybe, impossibly, had never left it. She looked forward. Something shifted in the dust. It didn't walk. It coiled. A shape without definition, just suggestion. Like memory half forgotten. Human-sized but wrong in all proportions. It didn't have a face. But it had presence. And she knew, without question, what she was seeing: the unbound. It had once been a student. A keeper. A person. But the act of hiding too much, forgetting too thoroughly, had twisted it. Not evil. Not malevolent. Just misaligned. Like a spell cast in a language that never had grammar. The air around it crackled with unfinished words. It moved toward her. Not aggressively. Just inevitably. Thistlewind did not move. She obeyed. No words. No breath. No memory. But the unbound didn't attack. It paused. And something shifted in the wall beside her. A door. Small. Covered in soot. It whispered her name, not aloud, but inwardly, through her ribs, her lungs, her spine: Thistlewind. You remember too much. She stepped through it. The unbound made no move to follow. But she felt it watching. Not with eyes. With recognition. As if a part of it knew her. Had once been her. And had chosen to remain behind when the world kept moving. The room beyond the door was empty. Truly empty. No furniture. No magic. No time. Only one thing sat at the center, a chair, carved of owl bones and spiral runes. It faced nothing. Waited for no one. She Saturday. The moment she did, the corridor behind her sealed itself. And the walls began to whisper. But not memories. Confessions. Voices of people who had been erased, overwritten, or silenced. Each sentence a single regret. I never told her I was afraid. I hexed him first, and I said it was the other way. I let them take the blame. I said nothing when I should have screamed. Thistlewind sat through it all. And did not flinch. The spiral quill beside her rose from her robe and began to write in the air. The confessions did not stop. They poured. Hundreds. Thousands. Not just students. Professors. Ghosts. House elves. Owls. The castle did not forget them. The castle stored them. Here. In the corridor of ash. Where the Unbound waited for someone brave enough not to cast a spell, but to listen. And as she listened, she felt the weight inside her shift. Not lighten, but redistribute. Like sorrow that had finally found shape. At the end of the corridor, a wall began to glow. A doorway formed. No handle. No name. Just a question carved in raw, writhing ink: do you carry enough now? She stood. Nodded. The wall turned to wind. And she stepped forward. Not back into Hogwarts. Not back into memory. But into the truth behind the castle's breath. There are things beneath Hogwarts that are not meant to be fixed. Only witnessed. And in witnessing, they become real again. She emerged into silence. No more dust. No more quill. She was standing once more in the map chamber. But now, a new corridor had formed on the dome's surface. And its label was not a name. It was a number. Above her, the center of the map pulsed. And beneath it, from the spiral itself, the voice returned. Not the Unbound. Not the scribe. But Sari and Vex. You've done what I could not. Now the castle must decide who remains forgotten. The 13th path had no door. Only a pull. The kind that pressed behind Thistlewind's sternum like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She stood in the map chamber, the silence loud with consequence. The spiral lines beneath her boots had grown thick, etched with names now instead of runes. Thousands of names. Some pulsed faintly. Others flickered. Many had already gone dark. Each was a life the castle remembered differently than the world did. Some were buried. Some were erased. And some were simply unspoken. But none were gone. The 13th corridor opened in silence, revealing a stone staircase descending not downward, but around, a spiral curling like a nautilus shell made of secrets. The walls were lined with plaques of obsidian black, each carved with a name. No dates. No house crests. No titles. Only names. Thistlewind began to descend. Every 5 steps, a voice echoed softly from the walls. Not recorded. Recalled. A girl's laughter. A boy whispering an apology. A ghost confessing it had lied. A professor repeating a spell he had no right to teach. The deeper she went, the more the voices overlapped, layered like parchment pressed together for too long, ink bleeding through until it was impossible to tell which truth had come first. The spiral wasn't a hall of honor. It was a ledger. Not moral. Not clean. Just exact. She passed names she'd never heard before. Others she knew too well. Cassian Dreel. A boy expelled for a crime he didn't commit. No records found. Voice, I only looked back once. Jenna Mirth. Disappeared in her 7th year. Officially marked as ran away. Voice, he told me I couldn't leave. So I did anyway. Elias Pencraft. A charms master who revolutionized spell notation. No mention in textbooks. Voice, they said I made it too easy. Sarian Vex. Name glowing. Voice, I thought if I forgot her name, the pain would leave. But it only hollowed. The spiral descended further. And her name appeared. Not at the bottom. Not at the top. Halfway down. Glowing. Thistlewind Moraine. No voice played. No quote. Just silence. Waiting. She stopped in front of it. Raised her hand. Touched the plaque. And the wall opened. Not physically. But intellectually. She suddenly knew every act she had done that someone else had forgotten. Every kindness ignored. Every cruelty dismissed. Every moment she had misremembered to protect herself. The spiral did not punish. It catalogued. Every act left a shape in the castle. Every silence left a weight. And here, in this coil of accountability, there were no villains. Only participants. The stairs ended at a dome chamber. Not wide. Not grand. But infinite in feeling. A pedestal rose in the center. A quill hovered over it, one of spiral bone. A basin sat below, swirling not with memory, but with identity. The map had redrawn itself again and again. Now it wanted a final shape. One based not on spells. Not on sorting. But on truth. The voice of the spiral spoke again. Not a whisper this time. Clear. Resonant. Neither male nor female. When the 13th truth is spoken, the names must be counted. The castle must choose what it carries forward. And what it leaves behind. The basin shimmered. A question appeared above it in light. What is Hogwarts meant to become? Thistlewind stepped closer. Not to answer, but to witness. The basin showed possibilities. A school run by the ministry, safe, Comte. Ind, stripped of history. A school returned to founders' ideals, divided, powerful, unchallenged. A school remade by keepers, quiet, secret, not governed by legacy but by memory. And a fourth shape. The map's own choice. No sorting. No silence. A place where remembrance itself was taught as magic. Where students learned not just spells, but how to carry the past without being broken by it. She whispered, "Let it be that." And the spiral shone. For the first time in centuries, it pulsed upward. Toward the towers. Toward the staircases. Toward the stones. And the names began to hum. In the owlery, murmur cried out once, sharp, final. Across the forbidden forest, the centaurs turned and looked toward the castle, and their eyes dimmed in shared recognition. In the chamber of dust, the scribe wept over a blank page. And the unbound, far below, folded itself into ash and disappeared. Not defeated. Accepted. Hogwarts did not change in a moment. But its memory did. It no longer forgot in silence. It remembered out loud. And from her place in the spiral, Thistlewind closed her eyes. The names still circled her. But they no longer accused. They sang. The castle breathed. Not with lungs. Not with life. With acceptance. It began at the floorboards, old oak groaning not with age, but with purpose. then the windows, whose panes now whispered reflections long buried. Even the staircases moved more gently, as if uncertain whether they still needed to lead where they always had. Something had shifted. Not in the stones. In the intention. Thistlewind walked slowly through the corridors, her footsteps silent not by spell but by invitation. No portrait spoke. No ghosts hovered near. It was as though the castle had paused, awaiting her decision, or mourning its own. The map chamber was gone. At least, gone from access. Its entrance had sealed the moment she emerged from the spiral of names. Not locked. Just concluded. Because it had served its purpose. And now, it was part of her. Not as a chamber to be reopened, but as memory to be lived outward. On the 5th floor, the walls began to hum. Not music. Not magic. Names. Softly. Repeated, as if relearning how to speak them. Jenna Mirth. Elias Pencraft. Sarian Vex. Why Emra? Each syllable slid through stone and settled into dust. The castle was cataloguing itself, not as archive, but as character. History, at last, was not being rewritten. It was being carried forward. Students noticed the changes first. A hallway near the library now opened only when walked in silence. A broom closet behind the greenhouses whispered forgotten recipes in a voice that sounded like someone's grandmother. The great hall ceiling sometimes flickered with visions that had never been seen. Quiet moments between students from decades past. One night, during a storm, a spiral appeared beneath every house table, glowing faintly, linking them. Not separating. Joining. The sorting hat began to hesitate. It still sang. Still sorted. But sometimes, when placed on a student's head, it whispered, "You may not need me anymore." In the forest, the centaurs held vigil. Braylan marked his hooves with spirals of silver dust. The young mare who wore the wand fragment carved Thistlewind's name into bark, not as prophecy, but as acknowledgement. The forest no longer pressed against the castle. It stood with it. A second border. A second memory. In the owlery, murmur had grown quiet. Not withdrawn. At peace. Owls began flying stranger routes, arcing through towers they had never passed before. Delivering no letters, only presents. And every morning, 5 feathers would fall into the fireplace in Thistlewind's study. Not burnt. Laid. Each a memory returned to her by a wing that had never forgotten. As for the wand, it was never found. Not by her. Not by any keeper. It had vanished after the spiral. But sometimes, in the mirror glass of the astronomy tower or in a particularly quiet gust of wind near the chamber of reflection, a single silver line would flicker. As if the wand had not disappeared. Only gone to where it was finally needed. Thistlewind remained at Hogwarts. Not as a professor. Not as a keeper. As a witness. Her job was not to teach. It was to remind. To sit in silence when silence was the answer. To speak a forgotten name when it mattered. And to walk the corridors not as someone above, but as someone who listened to the stones. On the first day of term the following year, a student entered the entrance hall early. Small. Nervous. Unsure. They hesitated, looking for someone to ask where the great hall was. The stones beneath their feet pulsed once, gently. And a spiral of silver light appeared on the floor, pointing the way. No one spoke. But the child smiled. And followed. And somewhere, deep beneath the castle, past dust, past grief, past trials and tears, the map stirred once more. Not redrawing. Not hiding. just watching. Because now, finally, the castle remembered. They were never just stories. Not the tales passed in dormitory whispers. Not the portraits' knowing glances. Not even the vanished footsteps that echoed down cold corridors when no one else was near. All of it meant something. All of it belonged. In Book 1, Hogwarts Beneath the Feather, we follow the quiet beginnings of a deeper truth, how even something as unassuming as the Owls of Hogwarts carried with them a history untouched by textbooks. What began as a curiosity about the castle's many, often contradictory transportation systems unraveled into a deeper realization: Hogwarts had never been designed merely as a school. It was a repository of memory, of regret, of unfinished things. The first book introduced us to Thistlewind Moraine, a scholar of magical symbology with a mind too sharp to leave mystery alone. As she uncovered the hidden patterns in owl flight, in vanishing cabinets, in forgotten platforms, and in portraits that refused to speak their names, she found herself staring into the edge of something lost, the legacy of the keepers, guardians not of secrets, but of consequence. She didn't find their names. She found their absence. And that absence led us into Book 2, The Lost Keepers and the Map Chamber, where consequence became map, and memory became test. Each chapter of this second journey plunged us deeper, not into Hogwarts as it is, but Hogwarts as it remembers itself when no one else does. We learned of the 5 trials, each built not to judge but to shape. We met the one that refused, not because it was broken, but because it had already chosen to mourn. We spoke with centaurs who had sealed away their own guilt. We followed the Moonfold, the vanished mapmakers who measured the castle not in feet or floors, but in feeling. We stood in the corridor of ash, where forgotten magic coiled into the unbound, no longer spell, no longer memory, but unresolved consequence given form. And then we descended the spiral of names. A place where the castle accounted not for good or evil, but for acknowledgement. Where every silence left a mark. Where every lost truth continued to live. In the end, it was not victory that changed Hogwarts. It was witnessing. Thistlewind did not defeat darkness. She did not destroy forgotten magic. She remembered it. She listened to it. And in doing so, she helped the castle remember itself, not as a fortress, not as a battlefield, but as a living archive of choices. Now, Hogwarts glows with quieter truths. Not less haunted. Just less ashamed. Its ghosts speak in new halls. Its owls take new routes. Its magic folds memory into stone, not to hide, but to carry forward. The keepers are not gone. They walk again in spiral-footed students, in silent corridors that now pulse with names once erased. And in the echo of Thistlewind's quiet footsteps, there is no finality. Only the ongoing work of remembrance. Because the past never truly leaves Hogwarts. It waits. Patiently. Until someone finally chooses to walk toward it, not with a wand raised, but with their eyes open. So, that's where we leave Thistlewind, for now. The castle remembers. The Unbound is no longer silent. And Hogwarts has begun to hum with old truths once more. But memory doesn't stay in one place. It moves. And now, we follow it. There's one place Hogwarts memory still moves in plain sight, every year, right under our noses. Every September 1st, it carries hundreds of young witches and wizards from King's Cross to the edge of the magical world. The Hogwarts Express. A red steam engine. A secret platform. A route no Muggle engineer could ever explain. But what if I told you? It's not just a train? The Hogwarts Express wasn't built to be convenient. It was built to contain something. A treaty. A threat. And a very old kind of magic. So here's what's coming next. We're diving into the true history of the Hogwarts Express, where it came from, what it replaced, and why some centaurs still call it the wound in the tracks. We'll uncover Ministry sabotage, vanishing train stations, enchanted timetables, and the one unspoken rule every conductor has followed since 1835, never ride the express alone. If you're still listening, do the castle a favor. Drop a like. Subscribe. Leave a comment with what you think the train is really protecting. Every signal boosts the spiral, and the deeper we go, the more Hogwarts gives back. Let's dive in. You ever think about this? Every student, Harry, Hermione, Tom Riddle, even Bellatrix Lestrange, they all took the same train. Same tracks. Same seats. Same red engine rolling through time like it's part of something bigger. But why a train? Why not brooms, or portkeys, or flue powder? Why enchant a Muggle invention with magic so old it nearly tore a hole in the Ministry? And how did the Hogwarts Express survive not just one, but two dark wars, ghost hauntings, and magical sabotage that could have erased it from wizarding history completely? This isn't just a train. It's a relic. A vault of memories on rails. A spell you can ride. Before we dive in, pause a second. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Seriously. Look at the clock. I want you to remember this moment, because something about this story is going to stay with you long after the video ends. In this video, we're unlocking the real origin of the Hogwarts Express. The secret Ministry mission that built it, the ghosts that haunt it, the curses that nearly derailed it, and how the train itself might actually remember the students it carries. And before you get too comfy or drift off, hit like now to help more people find this story. Trust me, you're not going to want to forget what you hear today. Now grab your trunk. Watch the barrier. We're boarding the train that built a school, and maybe saved it. The year was 1827, and the wizarding world was in chaos. Every September, the Ministry of Magic found itself frantically dispatching Obliviators across the British Isles, erasing the memories of Muggle bystanders who had witnessed inexplicable flashes of green fire erupting from chimneys, winged carriages weaving between clouds, or, on one especially disastrous occasion, a herd of centaur messengers galloping across the Yorkshire Dales carrying first-year's trunks. This was not how Albus Wintle, head of the Department of Magical Transportation, had envisioned the modern age of magical travel. His tea had gone cold again, untouched for the third time that morning, as he stared at the stack of parchment detailing transportation incidents from the latest Hogwarts intake. A portkey had gone off half a minute too early, sending two slithering girls spiraling into the underground cellars of Honeydukes. A Thestral-drawn carriage had overturned after a second year insisted on casting a levitation charm mid-flight. Worse yet, a young Muggle-born boy from Belfast had ended up trapped in a malfunctioning flue connection, spinning endlessly between two fireplaces in Glasgow. Wintle let out a long sigh and turned to his window. Diagon Alley bustled just beyond the soot streaked glass, but even its familiar cheer couldn't distract from the problem plaguing British wizardry. Hogwarts was simply too far, and too many children were arriving by far too many magical methods. In the adjacent office, Evangeline Orford, senior enchanter of magical innovations, was already drafting her proposal. Her quill moved in clean, precise strokes, sketching diagrams of locomotion runes and concealment charms that could render an entire train invisible to Muggles. She had long believed that if Muggles could move hundreds of passengers through countryside and city in a single machine of steel and steam, then wizards, surely, could do it better. And safer. But hers was a radical idea. Wizards distrusted Muggle inventions. Trains, to the average pureblood patriarch, reeked of soot, oil, and dangerous ideas. To place the transportation of the nation's wizarding children in the hands of a non-magical contraption was unthinkable to many. And yet, it was precisely that resistance Evangeline had prepared for. She stood now before the Wizengamot, facing a semicircle of robed figures who watched her with unreadable eyes. The courtroom thrummed with faint magic, the echoes of ancient enchantments clinging to the carved stone. "We are not suggesting integration with Muggle society," she said clearly, holding her scroll aloft. "We are proposing innovation under cover of enchantment. A self-contained, ministry-controlled, magically shielded railway system based on a Muggle engine, yes, but modified to the highest standards of magical concealment." A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. "Miss Orford," drawled Hezekiah Blackwood, a senior counselor and known traditionalist, "are you honestly proposing that we herd our young into a smog-belching machine? The current alternatives involve flying hippogriffs and experimental broomstick cradles," she countered. "If safety is our priority, we must evolve." Silence. Then Wintle stepped forward. "We've tried patches. It's time we built a system." The decision was not unanimous, but it passed, barely. The experimental project was greenlit, under one condition: complete secrecy. The Muggle government could know nothing. Not even the train engineers. Construction began under the pretense of a private rail company. The site was chosen for its remoteness, a valley near Crewe, shrouded in natural fog and laced with protective enchantments dating back to Druidic times. Here, Muggle workers assembled the body of the train, supervised discreetly by witches and wizards under Polyjuice potion. At night, the magical team worked their enchantments. Runes of expansion were etched beneath floorboards to accommodate shifting corridors. Displacement charms bent geography, allowing the train to reach a castle in the Scottish Highlands within hours. And at the train's very heart, a magically reinforced boiler hummed with phoenix feather embers and an ancient stabilizing spell whispered into its casing by unspeakables from the Department of Mysteries. The train was unlike anything the wizarding world had seen. It gleamed deep crimson beneath its spells, its sides polished to a mirror-like finish that shimmered under the wand light. It had 12 compartments per carriage, a sweet trolley charm to never run out, and a subtle enchantment that caused time to bend slightly within, enough that even latecomers would never miss the start of the term. But the greatest secret of all was Platform 9 3/4. Orford, ever the innovator, devised the platform as a meeting point between magical and Muggle realities. Hiding in plain sight at King's Cross, it could be accessed only by wizards who walked through the barrier with intent. To Muggles, it was just an ordinary wall. To witches and wizards, it became a gateway to a new age. The platform opened on August 31, 1838. The train stood waiting. It emitted no steam, no screech of iron on track, only a soft hum of magic held in perfect tension. Orford stood beside it, her black robes catching the rising breeze, her face calm despite the skeptical whispers gathering behind her. The first group of students appeared through the barrier. A boy with flaming red hair dragged a battered trunk. A girl clutched a cat to her chest. Then more followed. Eyes widened. Smiles formed. Skepticism faded into awe. By evening, as the sun dipped behind King's Cross, the Hogwarts Express had made its first journey north. Far in the Highlands, the staff of Hogwarts waited at Hogsmeade Station, unsure what to expect. But the train arrived on time, smooth, silent, and perfect. Headmaster Sylvanus Kettleburn, then only a young Transfiguration professor, watched the students disembark. "So," he whispered, brushing soot from his sleeve, "this is the future." Behind him, Headmistress Millicent Blore nodded. No more broken brooms. No more disapparated knees. Just children. Safe. But not everyone rejoiced. Deep in Wiltshire, at the estate of House Rosier, a letter was crumpled in fury. And in a smoky London tavern, a man known only as Arthur swore he would never let his bloodline set foot on that Muggle-born monstrosity. The Hogwarts Express, though born in hope, would ride the rails of resistance for decades to come. And yet, it endured. As the engine's first magical steam rose above the chimney and vanished into the night, a new era of wizarding travel had begun, one of steel, spellcraft, and stories that would echo through generations. By spring of 1838, the Muggle-built shell of the train sat complete in a secluded yard outside Crewe. The air around it shimmered with layered protective enchantments, each woven so tightly that time itself seemed to move more slowly inside its bounds. What had begun as a sketch on Evangeline Orford's desk had become a gleaming crimson giant, a prototype Muggle steam engine awaiting a soul. But what Orford and the Ministry had constructed was not yet a Hogwarts Express. It was still a shell, a marvel of Muggle engineering, yes, but inert. Lifeless. What it needed now was enchantment, and that meant drawing on magic far older and more unpredictable than many dared to channel. They called in the unspeakables. Not even Wintle knew the full names of the men and women who arrived that June under cover of night, shrouded in robes of storm-cloud grey. The head of the team was a tall, androgynous figure with silver-threaded gloves and no visible wand. They carried a black scroll tube and spoke only once, "Where is the heart?" It was Orford who led them to the boiler. The enchantment would require 3 full nights, conducted under the solstice moon. It was a rite lost to time, revived only through fragmented records kept deep in the Department of Mysteries. The core of it was the Vinculum Arcanum, a binding spell used only on magical artifacts intended to outlive their creators. It required a nexus of ley lines, a vessel of intent, and a source of primal magic. They had the ley lines. Crewe stood on a confluence older than Roman Britain. They had the vessel, the train itself, a thing forged from iron, fire, and intention. But the primal magic? A phoenix feather. Donated, reluctantly, by a bird that had once belonged to a young Albus Dumbledore's ancestor, Persephone Dumbledore, an eccentric transfiguration theorist. The feather was suspended in a sphere of crystal above the engine's core, wrapped in a protective shell of shimmering charms. At midnight, the ritual began. From the scroll tube came words not spoken in 1,000 years. They echoed off steel and stone, making even the Muggle rails vibrate faintly. The unspeakable stood in a wide circle, wands drawn in silence. The train glowed red, then gold, then violet as magical circuits engraved beneath the plating surged to life. The vinculum took hold. For one impossible moment, the train screamed, not aloud, but in the magical ether, a high-pitched ripple that made every wand in a 5-mile radius hum. Its voice joined the world's hidden song. Wizards in faraway towns woke from sleep. Centaurs in the Forbidden Forest turned their ears toward the north. The Hogwarts Express had become more than metal. It had memory. But the enchantments were not purely functional. Orford and her team laced the train with spells for comfort and protection. The carriages bore expansion charms and self-cleaning hexes. Enchanted trolleys stocked with sweets would refill with a flick of the conductor's wand. Windows showed not just the outside but also illusions of fine weather, even during storms. More importantly, safety spells were layered like lacquer. Temporal cushioning, a mild distortion field made collisions nearly impossible, subtly bending time around potential disasters. Cloaking wards prevented Muggle detection even at close range, redirecting notice like water off an umbrella. Compartmentalized protection rooms, each carriage could seal itself independently in case of an attack or malfunction. Every enchantment was reinforced with a memory anchor, a magical safeguard to ensure the train would remember its state and self-correct if damaged. Finally, the naming. It was Wintle, of all people, who wrote the name across the engine side with his wand, Hogwarts Express. The letters shimmered briefly, then settled into gold-lined serif script. The train seemed to inhale deeply. A rush of warm air hissed from its vents. "That's it," murmured Orford, her voice shaking. "It's alive." Still, there remained one final test: concealment within the Muggle world. The train needed to appear nowhere on paper and everywhere by magical intent. The Ministry's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office collaborated with the Department of Magical Transportation to embed the entire train with displacement glyphs, spells that would allow the train to exist within invisible space. It would operate on Muggle rails, but Muggles would never see it, hear it, or remember it had passed. The greatest triumph, though, came from Orford herself, the platform convergence charm. Inspired by her extensive research into spatial magic, Orford created the spell that would make Platform 9 3/4 viable. It was not simply a platform, it was a liminal gateway, a magical crease between Muggle and wizarding realities. The wall at King's Cross became the scene. Crossing through with intent would fold the world slightly, slipping the traveler between the folds like a letter in an envelope. To test it, Orford herself sprinted into the wall between platforms 9 and 10 one rainy morning in late July. She disappeared. Wintle nearly fainted. Then she reappeared seconds later, smiling and soaked with magical condensation. "It works," she said. And it did. By August, the train was ready. Hogwarts faculty visited in secrecy, inspecting the compartments and noting the spell work. Professor Septimus Kettleburn suggested installing a small enchanted compartment for creatures and pets. Professor Mereable Thistlethwaite tested every charm, her spectacles fogging with delight. And on August 31st, the Hogwarts Express rolled for the first time from its hidden chamber into the magical fold of Platform 9 3/4. It whistled, not with steam, but with a magical resonance tuned specifically to the frequency of the Hogwarts wards. It was both a call and a promise: the school would be ready. That night, Orford sat alone in the engine compartment, her hand resting on the now cool crystal housing the phoenix feather. The cabin glowed faintly, more alive than ever. She whispered, "Carry them well." And the train, in its way, seemed to answer, its lights flickering in quiet acknowledgement. The morning of September 1st, 1839, dawned cool and mist-laden, the skies over London heavy with the scent of damp cobblestones and soot. Beneath King's Cross Station, veiled between the bustle of Muggle commuters and ironclad locomotives, a marvel of magical engineering waited in perfect stillness, the Hogwarts Express. Platform 9 3/4 was hidden in plain sight, its shimmering boundary humming faintly as Ministry officials, cloaked in civilian garb, patrolled the station. Above the roar of Muggle trains and the clatter of luggage trolleys, the air on the magical platform was tense with expectation. Evangeline Orford stood at the foot of the train, her ministry robes pristine, her expression unreadable. She held a clipboard, though she scarcely looked at it, her eyes fixed on the barrier as the first wave of students approached. From the Muggle side, they appeared to vanish into the stone wall, one by one, pairs of parents and children hurtling through the hidden seam in reality. From the magical side, they emerged with laughter, surprise, and wide-eyed wonder. The crimson engine loomed before them, its polished sides glinting in the morning haze, letters inlaid in gold, Hogwarts Express. The magical train, now thrumming with dormant energy, exhaled a slow hiss of warm, perfumed steam as the children boarded. Wizards and witches clustered in quiet awe. For most, this was their first glimpse of the enchanted marvel whispered about in the Daily Prophet and discussed in hushed tones in tea parlors and apothecaries. For others, particularly those with pure-blood heritage, it was a bitter pill, a symbol of unnecessary mingling with Muggle technology. Among the latter stood Alistair Black, his expression sharp beneath a black bowler hat, arms crossed as his young cousin prepared to board. "This is folly," he muttered to no one in particular. "A Muggle engine dressed in spells. My ancestors travelled by enchanted galleon through the sky, not in iron coffins." The conductor, a squat, cheerful wizard named Grimble Bunch, blew a gleaming brass whistle. It sang a single, high-pitched note across the platform, and the doors to the carriages slid open with an audible click. The students, ranging from wide-eyed first years to smug fourth years, scrambled aboard with chatter and dragging trunks. At 10:56 a.m., the doors closed. At 10:59 a.m., steam hissed softly from beneath the engine. And at 11 a.m. sharp, the Hogwarts Express rolled forward for the first time. Inside, the ride was like nothing the children, or their families, had ever experienced. The carriages were warm and brightly lit, charmed to smell faintly of cinnamon and parchment. The seats cushioned themselves to each passenger. Charms whispered around the ceiling created subtle skies, reflecting the countryside's passage in soft magical illusion. In the third carriage, a nervous Muggle-born named Gregory Fensworth sat wide-eyed beside a half-blood girl who explained that the trolley would soon arrive with all the best sweets, chocolate frogs that jump, you'll see. She was right. The trolley which came down the aisle with a smile as wide as her hat, distributing confections in exchange for sickles and nuts with mechanical grace. But not everything was well. At the halfway point, just as the train curved along a bend near the Peak District, the ambient hum of magic faltered. A shudder passed through the train. Inside the engine compartment, Grimmauld Bunch blinked as the pressure gauges fluctuated. Then came the shriek. It wasn't mechanical. It was magical. An echo in the ether. Something was interfering with the train's ley line stabilizers. Alarms activated, an ancient bell began to toll rhythmically through the compartments. Runes etched into the windows pulsed red. In the distance, a dark shimmer spread across the tracks like spilled ink. A curse lay directly across the rails. Someone had tampered with the route. Back at the Ministry, warning glyphs flared to life on Evangeline Orford's wall. She didn't wait for orders. Apparating to the scene, alongside 3 Aurors and a retired Professor Marchbanks, she arrived on a bluff overlooking the train just as the disturbance came into full view. Standing on the opposing track, arms outstretched, was Alistair Black, his wand pointed directly at the rails. Ancient curses spiraled from his fingers, Obscurus-rooted magic meant to displace magical objects from space. He meant to vanish the train mid-motion. He never got the chance. Professor Hortensia Marchbanks, small and stern, stepped forward from behind a thicket of brambles, lifting her wand without a word. A spiral of flame, phoenix-shaped and searing white, burst from her wand. Alistair shouted, ducked, but the curse was deflected. He was disarmed and stunned before he could cast again. A moment later, Orford raised both hands and spoke the Ancorus Maxima, the emergency stabilizer charm woven into the engine's binding spells. It pulsed through the ground like a heartbeat, and the Hogwarts Express shuddered, but did not derail. The ley lines adjusted, rerouted by magic older than any blood feud. The train surged forward once more, restabilized. The children inside never knew how close they'd come. That evening, as the express pulled into Hogsmeade Station, the sky above burned gold with late summer sun. Hogwarts Castle loomed. Cart had changed into a buffet of roast chicken and treacle tart for no reason at all. They laughed, jostled, smiled. Headmistress Millicent Blore, flanked by Professors Kettleburn and Thistlethwaite, watched as each child stepped onto the platform. The express, she whispered to herself, has earned its name. Behind her, Orford arrived quietly, having taken a private flue to the station. Her robes were scorched at the edges. Her wand hand trembled. But when she saw the train, intact, breathing its low magical hum, she allowed herself a rare smile. Carry them well, she repeated. And the train, as if listening, gave a low, sonorous whistle. A sound like memory and magic. Like a promise kept. The year was 1892, and the Hogwarts Express was now a fixture of magical life. Generations of witches and wizards had boarded its warm compartments and watched the Muggle world fade into the countryside, enchanted trolleys rattling past with promises of pumpkin pasties and cauldron cakes. It was tradition. It was comfort. It was safe. So when the dining car door slammed shut on its own, and stayed locked for the entire journey on the 1st of September, it sparked more than curiosity. It sparked fear. It began with fog. Not the gentle wisps common on Highland mornings, but a dense, unearthly fog that seeped in through the cracks of the train's ornate windows, curling around boots and swirling across compartments like ink dropped in water. In Carriage 7, a Ravenclaw fifth-year named Agnes Blythe looked up from her copy of Magical Mechanisms of the Modern Era and frowned. Did the wards drop? She asked aloud, but her classmates only shrugged. In the next compartment, a first-year Muggle-born named Daisy Pindlehook watched with wide eyes as her chocolate frog leapt from its wrapper and vanished mid-air. A moment later, the room grew cold. Very cold. Conductor Grimble Bunch, now older, heavier, and with eyebrows like runaway broom bristles, sat in the engine cabin sipping tea. When the lanterns in the dining car flickered, he stood, scowling, and took up his wand. "Not again," he muttered. "Not you." He trudged down the corridor toward the dining car, his boots echoing in the strangely quiet passage. The windows along the corridor shimmered with condensation despite the dry weather outside. He reached the ornate double doors of the dining carriage and knocked twice. Nothing. He tried the handle. It didn't budge. With a sigh, he pointed his wand and muttered, "Alahomora." Still nothing. Then a voice drifted from within, whispery, off-key, and distinctly cheerful. "Tickets, please. All aboard, don't forget the dining car delights, oh, sticky tarts and treacle fright." Bunch froze. He recognized the voice. "Thaddeus?" he called. A groan of iron answered him, followed by the slow creak of hinges, ancient, aching, unwilling. The doors opened. Inside, the dining car had changed. The usual warm mahogany tables and red velvet booths were replaced by long banquet tables covered in cobwebbed platters of long-rotted food. Silverware floated in the air, spinning gently. Candles hovered over each table, flames burning blue. And at the far end of the car, standing tall in spectral grey, was a ghostly figure in a tattered conductor's uniform. Thaddeus Thimble. He was pale, thin, and shimmered faintly. His mustache curled like a question mark. His conductor's cap sat slightly askew, and one ghostly hand clutched an old puncher, worn from centuries of phantom use. "Ah," Thaddeus said, smiling. "A guest?" Thaddeus Thimble had been the original assistant conductor of the Hogwarts Express, a cheerful, obsessive man who had insisted on checking every single ticket personally, even when the number of students grew to several hundred. He had died on board the Express in 1857 during a freak magical lightning storm over Loch Shiel, struck while protecting a group of second years from a ruptured containment rune. He had died a hero. But unlike most, Thaddeus had not moved on. He had refused to disembark. For years after his death, he'd been absent. Until now. "Thaddeus, this is not the time," Grimble said, stepping into the eerie car, wand at the ready. "You're frightening the students." Thaddeus tilted his translucent head. "But the train, she remembers me. She called me back." "She didn't," Grimble said gently. "You came of your own." "You're welcome, but this," he gestured around at the cold, the fog, the floating utensils. "This is no way to announce yourself." A pause. Then Thaddeus blinked. "I thought it would be festive." The train gave a sudden lurch. In Carriage 3, a Gryffindor fourth year named Elias Merriweather spilled pumpkin juice all over his robes and yelled, "Oi!" "What was that?" Agnes Blythe, always ready, stood. Spectral displacement, she murmured. The ghost is integrated into the core wards now. We're sharing magical pressure. Back in the dining car, the temperature dropped again. Grimble took a step forward. Thaddeus, he said slowly, do you want to stay? The ghost considered. I never left. Then stay. But do it properly. Thaddeus nodded solemnly, and with a wave of his ghostly hand, the rotting platters vanished. The blue candle flames warmed into golden glow. The tables reappeared, clean and set. Even the cobwebs folded into nothingness like paper in firelight. The fog dispersed. And Thaddeus Thimble took his place beside the trolley which, holding out his ancient puncher and beaming with pride. Tickets, please, he whispered. The news of the haunting spread quickly through the school, and by October, students looked forward to seeing Old Thimble at the start of each journey. Some claimed he could predict what house a first year would be sorted into just by glancing at their trunk. Others said he whispered advice, avoid the third-floor corridor this term, or shared stories of the train's hidden compartments. Professor Marchbanks returned to inspect the magical integration and declared, with a sniff, well, as long as he's helpful. The ministry considered removing him but ultimately ruled that so long as he causes no spectral disruptions or emotional trauma, he could remain as honorary conductor emeritus. Thaddeus Thimble's presence became part of Hogwarts lore. He never left the train, not even during the summer months. Some said he spent those days polishing spectral railings or whispering jokes into the firebox, keeping the magic alive. And every September 1st, when the lanterns flickered just before departure, a faint, familiar voice would echo down the carriages. All aboard, the Hogwarts Express. The autumn of 1942 arrived with an unnatural stillness in the wizarding world. Far beyond the protective charms of Hogwarts and the invisible rails of the Hogwarts Express, shadows lengthened. Across Europe, Grindel's name was no longer spoken with fear, it was spoken with reverence by his followers and dread by the rest. Wizarding families whispered of disappearances, betrayals, and alignments once thought impossible. In Britain, the ministry walked a tightrope. Officially, it denounced Grindel. Unofficially, it feared provoking him. Yet through it all, one constant remained: the Hogwarts Express continued to run. It was not without risk. The train, once a marvel of innocence and exploration, had become a target. Not by Grindel directly, but by sympathizers within the Isles, radical pureblood supremacists and disillusioned magical theorists who believed Hogwarts should only educate the worthy. They viewed the train as a symbol of inclusivity. The great crimson equalizer that carried Muggleborns and purebloods alike in the same carriages, with the same sweets, and the same warm steam drifting from its enchanted chimney. So they plotted. They cursed sections of track. They released Confundus-charmed manticores onto the lines near Inverness. They tried, repeatedly, to disrupt the journey. But the Express endured. Thanks to the work of unsung heroes. One such hero was a fourth-year Hufflepuff named Elias Dawlish, half-blood son of a Muggle mechanic and a Ravenclaw curse breaker. Quiet, bookish, and awkward, Elias had an unusual affinity for wards, especially magical patterns based on Muggle circuitry, something he'd studied obsessively from his father's engineering journals. On September 1, 1942, Elias was seated in carriage 8 when the train jolted to a halt in the Cairngorms, far earlier than it should have. The lights flickered. Windows fogged. Something was wrong. Outside, grey shadows coalesced along the tree line. Not creatures, but humans, hooded, wand-bearing, and cloaked in the black sigils of Grindel's ideology. The train's protective wards held, but barely. The attackers weren't trying to board. They were casting anchoring hexes, binding the train to the earth, draining it of its speed and protection like sap from a tree. Inside, panic spread. Everyone back from the windows, shouted a prefect. Wands appeared. Younger students huddled under seats. The trolley witch, older now, face pinched with fear, pressed her palm against the dining car's hidden compartment, activating a defensive shield that flickered blue across the windows. Elias Dawlish, heart pounding, ignored the chaos. He dropped to the floor, opened his enchanted toolkit, and pried open a small brass panel beneath his seat, the emergency rune manifold. It was supposed to be accessed only by ministry personnel. But Elias had studied the diagrams. He knew the magical logic of the Hogwarts Express. While outside hexes cracked the outer shell of the train's charmwork, he reached inside the manifold and laid his hand across the core glyph, Repulsio Magnus. It had been dormant for decades, an emergency failsafe designed to eject magical interference using a pulse of compressed magical force. He whispered, "Sir, get Ignis." The glyph flared. A burst of invisible energy exploded outward from the train, invisible but ferocious. The hex lines cracked. The attackers stumbled. Their cloaking charms disintegrated. One dropped their wand. Another disapparated mid-fall. Inside, the lights returned. The train began to move again. Elias collapsed backward, exhausted but grinning. He never took credit. But by the time they reached Hogsmeade Station, the word had spread. And though the ministry covered it up, calling it a minor weather anomaly, the students knew. And Hogwarts awarded him a Medal of Magical Merit at term's end. That incident was one of many. In 1944, a Dementor swarm crossed the rails near Fort William. The train, thanks to wards renewed by Professors Dippet and Dumbledore, withstood their chilling presence. A trio of sixth-year Gryffindors cast simultaneous patronuses from opposite carriages, forming a protective corridor of silver mist. In 1945, during the Battle of Nurmengard, the Hogwarts Express was rerouted through Wales for the first time in its history. Its journey slowed but never stopped. A Muggle-born girl from Cardiff later wrote in her diary, "The train felt sad that day. Like it knew something big had ended. But also, like it was proud." In those years, the Express became more than transport. It became sanctuary. Headmaster Dippet began a tradition of greeting students at the station personally. The train staff added extra compartments for privacy, counseling, even, briefly, a traveling owlery for students worried about families abroad. And within the walls of the carriages, something else stirred. A consciousness? Perhaps it was the cumulative effect of years of protective enchantments, or the presence of so many powerful emotions, fear, hope, laughter, loss, but the Hogwarts Express developed a quiet sentience. It adjusted the temperature if a child was crying, shifted windows to show more peaceful landscapes. On rare occasions, it would subtly extend the journey by a few minutes, as if giving a nervous first year more time to prepare. No spell caused this. It simply happened. A testament to the magic of place, memory, and purpose. By the end of the war, the Express had earned a new nickname among students. The Red Sanctuary. In a world that had torn itself apart with ideology, blood, and betrayal, it remained a steel promise winding through moors and hills: you are not alone. You are going home. And the train never forgot. The station was noisier than usual. King's Cross, ever humming with Muggle chaos, seemed especially frantic on the morning of September 1st, 1991. Children shouted. Trolleys rattled. Steam hissed from iron beasts bound for far more ordinary destinations. The Great Hall buzzed with mundane movement, but not on platform 9 3/4. There, behind the concealed stone barrier, an ancient presence stirred. The Hogwarts Express, crimson and gleaming, waited with ageless patience. The train had, over the years, acquired the weight and warmth of identity, was more than bolts and enchantments. She remembered voices, feet pounding down corridors, the weight of trunks filled with spellbooks and secrets. She remembered the war. She remembered fire. But today, she felt something different. Something unfamiliar. A presence like a spark, barely restrained. Trembling magic, pure and raw, walked through the barrier and onto her platform. A boy, thin, pale, clad in oversized Muggle clothes, dragging a trunk far too large for his frame. The train noticed him the way a tree might notice lightning approaching, drawn, uneasy, alert. Harry Potter. She didn't know his name, not yet. But she recognized what he carried. The boy looked around in awe, his green eyes wide with wonder. Behind him, a red-haired boy shouted something to his mother, and a moment later, a whole crowd of Weasleys spilled onto the platform like warmth and chaos in human form. Harry watched them, tentative, hesitant. The train watched him. It had seen orphaned children before. Seen the lonely, the proud, the terrified. But never one like this, scarred in ways deeper than the lightning bolt on his forehead. She could feel it. The echo of curses not entirely faded. A lingering darkness pressed into his very bones. When he stepped into the corridor of Carriage 5, the temperature adjusted by half a degree. Subtle, just enough to ease the tension from his shoulders. Not magic cast, but magic remembered, a gift the train had learned to give. He walked slowly, staring at the polished wood, the enchanted windows, the compartment doors with golden handles. Behind him, the Weasley twins chattered. A girl with bushy brown hair asked if the trolley carried ginger newts. Somewhere, Thaddeus Thimble passed through a wall humming a cauldron full of hot, strong love. And then, "Can I sit here?" A red-haired boy, freckled and awkward, stood at Harry's compartment door. Harry hesitated. Sure. The Express, observing quietly, shivered with certainty. This mattered. As the train pulled away from the station, the gentle chug of her enchanted engine echoing through brick and mist, the journey began. Not just for the children, but for something far larger. The world shifted slightly on its axis. Inside the compartment, Harry and Ron Weasley fell into easy conversation. The train listened. They spoke of chocolate frogs and famous witches' cards. They compared hand-me-down robes and spellbooks, marveling at the unknown. When Hermione Granger entered later, eyes bright and voice quick, the train noted the rhythm change. Like a new harmony added to an old song. She was the kind of child who asked questions of the windows, who tried to trace the enchantments in the ceiling paneling. When Neville Longbottom wandered in, asking about a lost toad, the train offered a faint magical nudge, guiding him toward kindness, pushing their paths closer. It had done this for decades. Gently. Unseen. As the train crossed into Scotland, winding past locks and over enchanted viaducts, the Express allowed itself a rare indulgence. It remembered. It remembered James Potter and Sirius Black, laughing in Carriage 9. It remembered Lily Evans, reading aloud to a nervous first year beside her. It remembered Severus Snape, silent and fuming, staring out a window at clouds that mirrored his heart. It remembered Albus Dumbledore, once just a professor, sitting briefly in the front engine on a cold December night, his breath steaming with quiet thoughts. And now, here was Harry, a legacy child, a prophecy in motion. But still, just a boy, eating his first cauldron cake, laughing at a spell gone wrong, staring out the window in wonder. As dusk approached, the towers of Hogwarts crested the northern hills. The train whistled, not the usual note, but a softer tone, tuned precisely to the heart of the ancient wards guarding the castle. It was a greeting. A signal. Prepare. He is coming. Inside, the students leaned toward the windows, eyes wide. The Express slowed as it neared Hogsmeade Station. Lanterns lit themselves. A gentle heating charm bloomed through the carriages, warding off the Highland chill. When Harry stepped off the train, his boot touched the stone platform, and the magic of the castle reached for him. He didn't know it. Couldn't feel it. But the express did. As the doors closed and the train began its slow return to dormancy, she exhaled once, a plume of golden steam rising to the stars. A memory added itself to her metal bones. A boy with a scar. The one who came quietly and would change everything. A memory added itself to her metal bones. A boy with a scar. The one who came quietly and would change everything. But even as Harry's footsteps echoed off the stone platform, the express did not let go of the moment. She lingered in presence, her frame cooling, her magic dimming, her wheels slowly ceasing their roll. This pause, brief and unnoticed by students, was her private ritual. A holding of breath, of memory, of meaning. The platform emptied quickly. Luggage was whisked into enchanted carts. First years were guided by a half-giant who smelled of earth and kindness. The others marched toward carriages pulled by beasts not yet visible to their young eyes. And still the express watched. She felt it, the echo of prophecy clinging to Harry's robes like invisible mist. But prophecy was not her language. She dealt in moments, in weight and warmth and the unspoken language of transition. The first tears of a homesick 11-year-old. The breathless kiss behind a fogged window. The silence of loss carried on return trips after war. Harry's presence had added a new note to her song, a quiet thread of inevitability that hummed against her walls long after he was gone. In the engine room, the last of the glowing embers within the magical firebox dimmed. A faint echo of phoenix feather warmth faded to amber. The control panel runes slid into dormancy, their light sinking into the brass plates like fireflies retreating for the night. Outside, the mist deepened. The Hogwarts Express was alone again. But not lonely. Inside carriage 5, still scented faintly of treacle and peppermint, something curious occurred. A chocolate frog card, forgotten on the windowsill, began to flutter. Not from wind. From resonance. The portrait of Albus Dumbledore inside glanced up, as if he too had noticed the shift. His eyes met the train window. "Ah," he whispered. "So it's begun." And then he winked, yes, quite definitely winked. And vanished from the card, leave. The safe, flickering lanterns. And now, added to that vast tapestry of memory, a lonely boy's small smile as he shared his very first pumpkin pasty. A red-haired boy's eager talk of chess and family and spells he hadn't yet mastered. A girl's curious eyes cataloguing magic with awe and longing. A soft-spoken child who'd lost a toad and found, instead, connection. Small things. Beautiful things. That was how legends began. By midnight, the Express had tucked herself away in her hidden siding, miles beyond Hogsmeade, wrapped in fog and memory. Her tracks shimmered faintly, cooled by enchantment, encircled by wards so old their runes had grown into the trees. She slept. But not deeply. In her slumber, she dreamed. Of red steam and golden light. Of children laughing. Of a boy with a scar. And of the moment, inevitable and immense, when she would carry him again. Years from now. Wounded. Changed. But returning. She would carry him to battle. She would carry him to hope. She would carry them all. Because that was her promise. Her purpose. The Hogwarts Express did not just carry students. She carried generations. She carried the future. It had been 1 year since the Battle of Hogwarts. The castle had been rebuilt. The Forbidden Forest had healed. The ministry had purged itself of corruption, slowly, painfully. But the scars remained. And yet, on the 1st of September, 1999, Platform 9 3/4 once again thrummed with life. The Hogwarts Express stood waiting, her paint freshly polished, her brass fittings glinting beneath morning sun. She whistled once, softly, like a sigh, and opened her doors. She was ready. Children swarmed the platform, some laughing, others weeping, some wide-eyed and clinging to parents' hands. New names. New houses. New fears. But the rhythm was familiar. Some, though, were not new. Among the crowd walked Professor Minerva McGonagall, clad in emerald green, her expression stern but softened by a rare smile. She paused at the train's engine, one hand brushing against its warm metal as though greeting an old friend. "You're still here," she whispered. The train gave a low hum in response. She turned as a voice rang out. "You're talking to it too, then?" Luna Lovegood, dreamy-eyed and now working with the Department of Magical Creatures, approached, a satchel of scrolls on one shoulder and a pair of charmed spectacles perched atop her head. "I believe it's semi-conscious," Luna said calmly, peering into the chimney with interest. "There are traces of ancient ley-bound runes I've never seen elsewhere. I think it runs on a combination of phoenix memory and ambient childlike wonder." McGonagall raised an eyebrow. "I was just saying hello." "Ah. Well. It remembers you." A special ceremony had been organized for this particular ride. The ministry, eager to honor the centennial-plus legacy of the Hogwarts Express, had invited veterans, professors, and magical historians for a commemorative departure. Journalists milled about, snapping pictures. A plaque was unveiled on the platform's stone wall. "Steel and Memory, the Hogwarts Express, in honor of every journey, every child, and every future it carried." As the speeches began, the train herself remained silent, dignified. But within her core, something stirred, old magic vibrating like a heartbeat. She remembered. She remembered the cries of children in the 1940s. The laughter of pranksters in the 70s. The silence of fear in the early 90s. The sudden weight of absence when beloved names stopped appearing each September. She remembered Fred Weasley. She remembered Colin Creevey. She remembered Remus Lupin, once slouched in carriage 6, hand gripping a cane of silver-bound yew. And yet, she also remembered recovery. Neville Longbottom, now a professor, entered her compartments with confident strides. He sat in carriage 2, where he once cowered from Slytherins, and smiled at a nervous first year who couldn't stop asking questions. Hermione Granger boarded alongside Ron, now parents. Their daughter, Rose, peered out a window as the train gave a faint shudder of recognition. Even Harry Potter, quiet and weary, appeared at the edge of the platform. He didn't board. Not this year. But he placed a hand on the steel edge of the engine, eyes distant. He didn't speak aloud. He didn't have to. The train heard him all the same. Inside, the dining car had been restored to its original splendor, with gilded menus and floating lanterns. Thaddeus Thimble, ever faithful, appeared once to check compartments before fading back into the ether. The trolley witch sang quietly as she arranged her sweets. "I remember you all," she whispered. "You grew up here." As the whistle blew for departure, the Hogwarts Express began to move, not just with steam, but with purpose. Through the Highlands once more. Across bridges laced with magic. Past forests and rivers and ruins whispered about in textbooks and bedtime tales. Inside the compartments, children wrote letters home. They pressed noses to the glass. Some fought. Some cried. Some fell in love before the train reached Hogsmeade. And the Express absorbed it all. In her dreams that night, the train recalled everything. Evangeline Orford's hands in soot and parchment. The shouts of ministry officials debating tradition. The first click of wheels on enchanted rails. The fear of war. The joy of reunions. She dreamed of flames and frost, of flying letters and quiet revelations. She dreamed of every face. Every year. And when dawn rose again, she knew. She would keep dreaming. Because that was her gift. The Hogwarts Express did not simply carry students. She carried stories. And stories, like magic, never truly end. And there you have it, the untold, canon-inspired tale of the Hogwarts Express, from its magical invention under secrecy, to ghostly encounters in the dining car, to the terrifying days of war, and finally, to its enduring legacy as a symbol of hope, memory, and generations of magical journeys. We learned how witches and wizards, desperate for safe transport in the early 1800s, transformed a Muggle steam engine into something alive with enchantment and purpose. We met visionaries like Evangeline Orford, spectral conductors like Thaddeus Thimble, and brave students like Elias Dawlish, all of whom shaped the Express into the icon it is today. But here's the thing, the Hogwarts Express doesn't just carry students. It carries stories. And if you've made it this far into this story, you're exactly the kind of person who wants to keep exploring the secrets of the wizarding world. We know the Express leaves from platform 9 3/4. But in what real-world year did J.K. Rowling first reveal the full backstory of the train on Pottermore? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'm watching for the clever ones. And hey, if you enjoyed riding along through the lore today, don't forget to subscribe for more magical deep dives. I've got plenty more where this came from, unsolved mysteries, magical inventions, character breakdowns, all the juicy bits buried in the books and beyond. If this ride through wizarding history gave you chills, you'll love the one where we crack open the mystery of Harry Potter's diary. That one's linked right here on the end screen.